Chapter 15:15. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Shui Shui called out in a low voice, giving Xiaohua a big fright. He suddenly came to his senses and looked all around. The languid expression on his face had long since disappeared. But when he saw that there wasn't the slightest bit of abnormality around him, he turned his head and asked curiously, "Fellow Taoist Shui, is there something wrong?" "No, nothing." Shui Shui's face blushed, and her eyes flickered. She hurriedly covered it up and said, "I just woke up and casually called fellow Taoist Xiao. Is that so?" Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled. But when he looked around again, there was indeed nothing to pay attention to. When he wanted to ask more, his gaze was attracted by a few children in front of him. Those children were only 4 or 5 years old. Beside them, there were a few low-level refinement middle-aged men accompanying them. Their faces were full of spirit, and they were curiously looking around. "Eh? Fellow Taoist Shui, are these children also participating in the selection?" Xiaohua pointed and asked. "Oh, those children!" Shui Shui's face was still slightly flustered. She used her hand to stroke the hair in front of her forehead and laughed softly. "Of course. Didn't I say last night? The first test of the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple selection is to test the attributes of the body. As long as one has the lightning attribute, they will be accepted by the Imperial Thunder Sect. These children are young. Their body attributes should meet the requirements of the Imperial Thunder Sect, right? If it is a fight, how can they be the opponent of others?" Oh, Xiaohua nodded. Recruiting 4 or 5-year-old children was a common method of all sections. The Imperial Thunder Sect was naturally not an exception. Looking at Xiaohua, Shui Shui's heart was churning. Fellow Taoist Xiao, why did he return to his old self? He looks really ordinary like this. If he was always like that, lazy, how good would that be? Although Xiaohua's perception was powerful, he still could not penetrate Shui Shui's heart. How could he know what Shui Shui was thinking? At this time, the sun had already risen high in the east, illuminating the entire Thunderclap Peak with golden light. Looking outside from the foot of the Thunderclap Peak, it was no different from usual. There was no restriction at all. And at this time, the light of the round ball that was used as a moonstone last night was gradually disappearing. Only traces of lightning still appeared from time to time. "Fellow Taoists!" Suddenly, a deafening voice resounded throughout the Thunderclap Peak. "Ah?" This sudden voice startled Xiaohua. What level of cultivation was this? That voice was deep and resounding, like rolling thunder that spread throughout the entire Thunderclap Peak, causing all the cultivators on the Thunderclap Peak to be shocked. However, this, "fellow Taoists," left Xiaohua puzzled, and when the second sentence was heard, Xiaohua couldn't help but smile. "Thank you all for coming to my Imperial Thunder Sect. I am Zhen Yeming, a disciple of Zhen Lei Palace. I will be in charge of today's selection." As it turned out, this voice was coming from the many balls in the air. No wonder it could be heard everywhere. It was clear that the cultivation level of this voice was profound. "The first test is to test your physical attributes. If you meet the requirements of the Lightning Controlling Sect, the disciples of the Lightning Controlling Sect will give you a numbered medallion. This medallion will be used to identify you in the disciple selection. When the selection is over, the disciples who didn't pass the selection can take this token with them. Let me tell you, fellow Taoists, this token contains a defensive yellow talisman. Perhaps it can save your life when you're in danger." Upon hearing this last sentence, Xiaohua smiled even more. This tone and the faint pride in these words were probably not something a Foundation Establishment senior would reveal. "All right, fellow Taoists, please stand where you are and don't move. The disciples of Zhen Lei Palace and Converging Thunder Palace will appear by your side soon." The voice was slightly exaggerated and even dragged out. As the voice fell, the many balls in the air emitted dazzling lightning. As the lightning flashed, several small figures appeared in each of the balls. These figures were like pieces of light that flashed across the entire Thunderclap Peak. However, among these light figures, there were many boys and girls around the 6th layer of Qi refining who were no more than 11 or 12 years old who landed on the foothills of the Thunderclap Peak. Although these boys were a bit young, they were all extraordinary. Needless to say, the boys and girls were all pretty and delicate. With a single glance, one could tell that they were people with excellent foundations. Just by standing there, they had an extraordinary bearing, which made the tens of thousands of cultivators on the Thunderclap Peak admire them. Fellow Taoists, I have been sent by my senior brother to test your physical attributes. I hope that you will cooperate. The boys, regardless of whether they were facing a 10th layer Qi refining cultivator or a 1st layer Qi refining cultivator, all bowed respectfully and spoke in a humble tone. Xiao Hua and the others secretly cheered in their hearts, and also bowed respectfully. All right, fellow Taoists, please test according to the arrangement of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Fellow Taoists who have not passed the test, please go to the west side of the Thunderclap Peak. My Genlei Palace disciples will escort you out of the mountain. The voice sounded again. Immediately after, a young cultivator around 30 years old wearing a purple Taoist robe with a 12th layer Qi refining cultivation appeared in the air. This young cultivator's face was crimson red and his forehead was full. He wore a slight smile on his face and very conceitedly looked towards the Thunderclap Peak. This is Zhen Yeming. Xiao Hua had long felt it. He stood in the middle of the group of cultivators and narrowed his eyes. 30 years old, 12th layer Qi refining. Compared to Li Zongbao, he is still lacking. I am now in the 10th layer Qi refining. In another 10 years I should be able to reach the 12th layer Qi refining. At that time, I's age seems to be hard to calculate. If we count from the time I was 18 years old at Yellow Flower Ridge, I should be 23 years old right now. But I still seem to be 18 years old. If I tell people that I am still 18 years old, they should be able to deceive them. Even if I reach the 12th layer Qi refining at 33 years old, I can still be considered amazing. Not to mention Xiao Hua's narcissism, the children of the Genlei Palace and the converted Thunder Palace had already started testing the cultivator's attributes. Sure enough, as Shui said, the magic tool of the Imperial Thunder Sect was different from usual. It was not in the shape of a ball, but rather in the shape of a flute. At one end of the flute, there was a handle-like groove. Fellow Taoists, please use your hand to hold the groove of the mirror spirit. Do not use magic power! The child closest to Xiao Hua was a girl from the converted Thunder Palace. Her voice was very clear and pleasant to the ears. At this moment, she was talking to an 8th layer Qi refining cultivator several zhang away. The male cultivator cupped his hands and said with a smile, Many thanks, fellow Taoist. I want to see if I meet the requirements of the Imperial Thunder Sect. With that said, the cultivator took the mirror spirit from the girl's hand and placed his hand on the groove. A strange thing happened. A light blue brilliance appeared from the groove in the cultivator's hand and slowly spread to the other side. However, after just a few inches, the light blue brilliance stopped and refused to move forward. When the male cultivator saw this, although he didn't know how to use the mirror spirit, he knew something was wrong when he saw that the light blue brilliance occupied less than half of the entire mirror spirit. Without waiting for the male cultivator to speak, the girl said with a smile, My apologies, fellow Taoist, you don't meet the requirements of our Imperial Thunder Sect. Please go to the west side of the shocking Thunder Peak. In a moment, a senior martial brother from the Genlei Palace will escort you out of the mountain. The male cultivator wanted to ask for the reason, but when he saw the girl's hand, he let out a sigh and handed the mirror spirit over. He then turned around and walked to the west. A 5-year-old boy next to the male cultivator blinked his eyes and cutely asked, Big sister, how about I take the test? A 2nd layer Qi condensation cultivator next to the boy poked him and scolded, Call her fellow Taoist. The boy pouted and looked at the cultivator with a wronged expression. He helplessly said, Fellow Taoist, big sister, pft. Everyone around them burst out laughing. The cultivator's expression was very unnatural. He glared at the boy and said, Little brother, you want to take the test too? You have to perform well. If you don't pass, big sister won't let you pass. The girl saw how cute the boy was and smiled like a flower. She handed the mirror spirit over. When the boy's chubby hand grabbed the mirror spirit, a ray of purple and red light appeared. It was extremely dazzling and flowed to the other side of the mirror spirit like water. It only stopped halfway through the mirror spirit. Excellent! The girl clapped and smiled. Little brother, you are the first person big sister took today. Ah? Really? The boy didn't say anything, but the cultivator was so happy that he almost jumped up. Little brother, give the mirror spirit to big sister. The girl smiled and asked, How old are you this year? The boy handed the mirror spirit to the girl and smiled. I am 5 years old and 2 years old. 5 years old and 2 years old? The girl was clearly stunned and asked, Then you are 7 years old? The cultivator quickly explained, No, he is 5 years old this year. He just had his birthday 2 months ago. Ah? Ha! The girl was clearly amused. She covered her mouth and laughed. Okay, since little brother is only 5 years old, he doesn't need to pass the second test. Oh right, fellow Taoist, is he fellow Taoists? The girl turned and asked the cultivator. He is I's son, my son. The cultivator happily said. Has he cultivated any techniques? Yes. I taught him the basic techniques half a year ago. He is almost at the first layer of qi refining. The cultivator proudly said. You taught him a technique? The girl frowned. What? Did I do something wrong? The cultivator became anxious. Of course you did something wrong. Very wrong, the girl mercilessly said. What technique is your technique? What technique is my Imperial Thunder Sect's technique? Is it better to use your technique to let this child enter the sect or use my Imperial Thunder Sect's technique to let him enter the sect? This? The cultivator's face turned ashen after hearing this. -6. Chapter 15-16. Fortunately, he hasn't entered the first layer of qi refining yet. Moreover, he has a thunder attribute physique, so he meets the requirements of my Imperial Thunder Sect. Otherwise, as the girl spoke, she patted her hand and took out a message talisman from her storage pouch. She used her magic power to activate it, and it flew away. Then she said to the cultivator, Fellow Taoist, are you also participating in the selection? Me? The cultivator pointed at his nose and bitterly smiled. I's age and cultivation. How can I enter the Imperial Thunder Sect? Fellow Taoist is quite self-aware. However, this is a rare opportunity for my Imperial Thunder Sect. Anyone who comes to my Thunderclap Peak can take the test. Fellow Taoists might as well give it a try. The girl spoke in an orderly manner, causing the people nearby to be convinced. Even though Xiaohua was a bit far away, he could still inwardly nod his head. Hearing this, the cultivator also nodded his head and took the mirror spirit. After taking it, a dark red light flashed and slowly flowed less than an inch before stopping. When the cultivator saw this, his face flushed red. Oh, fellow Taoist is of the fire attribute. The girl nodded her head and said, Fellow Taoist, you can try activating your magic power. I can activate magic power? Why didn't that cultivator move aside? Xiaohua's eyes turned, and he understood. That cultivator just now had a light blue brilliance. According to the 5 elements, it should be of the water attribute. It was the opposite of the Imperial Thunder Sect's cultivation method, so there was naturally no need to use magic power. The cultivator activated his magic power, but when the cultivator's face flushed red, the light red light only moved half an inch. All right, fellow Taoist, you don't meet the requirements of my Imperial Thunder Sect. Please go to the west side of the Thunderclap Peak. The girl took the mirror spirit with a smile and spoke very naturally. But what about my son? He doesn't seem to have received a command medallion yet? The cultivator looked at the boy with reluctance and asked pitifully. This little brother is below 5 years old and doesn't need to pass the second and third tests. Therefore, you don't need to give out a token. I have already sent a message to the senior martial brothers in Zhenlei Palace. They will send people over to pick this junior martial brother up. Genlei Palace will have a special test for this junior martial brother. And this test is very simple. If you follow it shouldn't be a problem. Oh, that's right. This is the token of a relative of a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Take it and register it in the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciplinary hall. The external affairs disciple of the disciplinary hall will explain to you how to visit this junior martial brother in the future. The girl clapped her hands and a small square token was handed over to the cultivator. Good. Good. The cultivator's face was filled with tears as he stroked the boy's hair a few times and whispered, Awa. Listen to your senior sisters in the Imperial Thunder Sect. Cultivate well for your father. You must make your father proud. The boy seemed to understand, but he didn't. He opened his eyes wide and nodded obediently. While they were talking, a 10th layer chi refining cultivator flew out from the nearest ball and landed beside the girl. Senior martial brother Jen Yun, it's this boy. The girl cupped her hands and bowed. She pointed at the boy and said, The cultivator looked at the boy, and without another word, he reached out and grabbed the boy's arm. Then, he flew into the air and entered the ball. Awa! The boy's father stopped after chasing for half a step and couldn't help but call out in a low voice. Xiaohua watched from afar. On the entire Thunderclap Mountain, there were also a few disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect flying out from several places. They also brought a few boys and girls into the ball. Innate attributes are still the most important. Xiaohua sighed inwardly. Fellow Xiao, you don't have to be envious. Seeing this, Shui smiled and said, Although this boy is of the Thunder attribute, and can cultivate the cultivation method of the Imperial Thunder Sect, it's only a possibility. As for whether he can cultivate or not, it'll still depend on his future cultivation to prove it. And then, is there a method that can be used like testing the 5 elements? As long as it can be tested, it'll definitely be able to cultivate? Xiaohua suddenly thought of something and asked. Fellow Xiao, this is a good question. Shui was stunned and said, I have never thought of this before. I was just casually saying it, Xiaohua said with a smile. After the boy's father left, the female disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect continued to test the other cultivators. The next few cultivators didn't have the Thunder attribute or the Fire attribute. Although one of them was yellow in color, that cultivator said, Fellow Taoist, I have always cultivated the Fire attribute cultivation method. Moreover, the elders in the clan also said that I have the Fire attribute. Can you let I activate my magic power? The girl shook her head and said, Fellow Taoist, my Imperial Thunder Sect naturally recruits disciples based on my Imperial Thunder Sect's spirit. Even if fellow Taoist believes that you have the Thunder attribute, if my spirit can't flash a purple light, then you can't have the Thunder attribute. Then, she looked at that cultivator's cultivation and said softly, Moreover, even if fellow Taoist is of the Thunder attribute, with such a young age in cultivation, I'm afraid that you won't be able to pass the 2nd and 3rd tests. Fellow Taoists should go to the west side of the Thunderclap Peak. There's a 3rd test? Xiaohua was stunned and turned to look at Shui. As expected, Shui's face was also filled with surprise. The next cultivator was of the Fire attribute. A blood-colored light traveled for about 2 inches. That cultivator's face turned ugly, but the girl didn't think so and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist is of the Fire attribute, you can activate your magic power. That cultivator activated his magic power and the blood-colored light, as if taking a Peiyuan pill, suddenly traveled 50% of the distance. Good. Fellow Taoist, congratulations on passing the 1st test. Seeing this, the girl clapped her hands and took out a number plate from her storage pouch. She lowered her head and looked at it, then handed it over. Fellow Taoist's number plate is number 24, please keep it well. That cultivator's hands were trembling. He still didn't believe it and took the number plate. He brought his arm to his mouth and fiercely bit it. Ouch! By the time that cultivator cried out in pain, the girl had already taken the spirit mirror to test the next cultivator. Although the process of the test was very simple, there were really too many cultivators on the Thunderclap Peak. That was tens of thousands of cultivators, There were probably over 100 cultivators surrounding the girl. Xiaohua and Shui were standing not too far away from the girl. Seeing that less than 10% of the cultivators passed the test and the other 90% of the cultivators left dejectedly for the west side of the Thunderclap Peak, their hearts were also restless. The first test of the Imperial Thunder sect actually didn't look at cultivation, only the body's attribute. Moreover, the way they determined the attribute was different from outside. Many cultivators also thought that they were of the fire attribute, but they were all denied by the girl. Therefore, Xiaohua's heart was restless. Previously, when Xiaohua was at Yellow Flower Ridge, he didn't test any attribute. He even tested that he was of the water attribute. It was only later that he learned that he was of the fire attribute when he practiced the raising fire to burning heaven. Unfortunately, the Imperial Thunder sect didn't allow him to use his magic power at the beginning of the test. Xiaohua seemed to have seen the light blue brilliance of the spirit mirror when he received it. 4 hours passed very quickly. The number of people around the girl became fewer and fewer. Almost everyone had passed the test. The girl raised her head, looked around, and said with a smile, "Is there anyone else who hasn't taken the test? Fellow Taoists, don't think that you're lucky. In a while, my Imperial Thunder sect will conduct the second test. If you don't get a token, when the restriction of the Thunderclap Peak activates, you will lose your life." Sure enough, as the girl said, there were a few people hiding at the side who wanted to make up the numbers. At this time, they had no choice but to come out and take the test. "Let's go, fellow Taoist Shui. Even if we have to wait until the end, we still have to take the test." Xiaohua looked at Shui, who was also a little flustered, and said in a low voice, "AI, let's go together." Shui replied, "I have the earth attribute, I'm afraid I won't be able to pass this test." When Xiaohua and Shui arrived at the girl's side, the few cultivators who passed off as fish eyes had already dejectedly headed to the west side of the Thunderclap Peak. "Fellow Taoists, who will go first?" The girl had already seen Xiaohua and Shui and asked with a smile. "Fellow Taoist Shui, you go first." Xiaohua took half a step back and said with a smile, "Okay." Shui smiled bitterly. She stretched out her white and tender right hand and took the spirit mirror from the girl. Shui closed her eyes. "Ah!" Just when Shui closed her eyes, a sound of astonishment immediately came from all around. "Fellow Taoist Shui, you have the lightning attribute. Quickly open your eyes." Xiaohua's cheerful and envious voice sounded in Shui's ears. "Ah? Really?" Shui's heart was immediately filled with joy. She couldn't wait to open her eyes. Sure enough, the spirit mirror in Shui's hand was emitting a bright purple-red brilliance. That brilliance was already more than half of its length. "Hee, congratulations, fellow Taoist, you have the mythical thunder physique, which is precisely the requirement to become a disciple of my Imperial Thunder sect. Please take this token and wait for the second test." The girl clapped her hands and smiled. She took out the token from her storage pouch and handed it to Shui. Then she took the spirit mirror from Shui's hand and turned to Xiaohua and said, "Fellow Taoist, you should be the last one to take the test. Please take the test. The second test of my Imperial Thunder sect should begin in an hour." Xiaohua looked at the spirit mirror in front of him and took a deep breath. He nodded slightly and said, "Yes, I will take the test now." However, Xiaohua stretched out his hand, but before he could touch the spirit mirror, he stopped again. There was a feeling of loss and gain in his heart. "Hee, fellow Taoist, you're already at the 10th layer of the Qi refinement realm, but your Tao heart is still not stable? If this continues for a long time, I'm afraid your realm will become unstable." The girl smiled sweetly and stuffed the spirit mirror into Xiaohua's hand. However, a strange thing finally happened again. That spirit mirror in Xiaohua's hand actually didn't have the slightest reaction. It was exactly the same as when the girl held it in her hand just now. The girl frowned slightly and said in displeasure, Fellow Taoist, don't try to show off some divine ability. If this spirit mirror doesn't have any reaction, you will also be eliminated. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. -6. Chapter 15-17. Seeing that the situation he was most worried about was indeed happening again, Xiaohua inwardly cursed. However, he shook the mirror spirit in his hand again and again, but the mirror spirit still didn't move at all. Seeing Xiaohua like this, the girl very justly smiled and said, "Since fellow Taoist, wait a moment, fellow Taoist." Seeing that the girl was about to announce his elimination, Xiaohua immediately said anxiously, "I didn't use any secret technique to hide my attribute. This mirror spirit, is it broken? Think about it. I came all the way to the Thunderclap Peak, how could I possibly make things difficult for myself? This?" The girl looked at Xiaohua. Sure enough, he didn't show any signs of using magic power. She immediately scratched her head and said, "That's right, this concealment technique was only taught by Martial Uncle half a year ago. Even this poor Taoist had to practice for several months before being able to grasp it. How do you know the secret technique of my Imperial Thunder sect? Could it be, it's really broken?" As she spoke, the girl took the mirror spirit. The magic power in her body slightly moved and a faint purple light flashed on the mirror spirit. That light quickly rushed to the mirror spirit's position about 60%. The girl's expression slightly changed. She didn't hand the mirror spirit over to Xiaohua and only said, "Fellow Taoist, I'm very sorry. You don't meet the conditions for my Imperial Thunder sect to recruit disciples. Fellow Taoist, please go to the west side of the Thunderclap Peak. In a moment, my Zhenlei Palace's senior brothers will." Xiaohua was naturally very anxious and said loudly, "Fellow Taoist, I was watching from the side just now. I only know that among the 5 elements, cultivators with metal, wood, water, and earth attributes don't meet the conditions for your sect to recruit disciples, but I didn't hear that cultivators with no attributes don't meet the conditions for your sect to recruit disciples. How about you let me try again by pouring magic power into the mirror spirit?" The girl slightly shook her head and said in all seriousness, "Fellow Taoist is wrong. I received an order from my master that those with lightning, wind, yin, yang, and other extremely rare attributes can all pass the first round of selection. Those with fire attributes can pour magic power into the mirror spirit to test the strength of the fire attribute. If it's more than half, they can pass. However, they never said that cultivators with no attributes can pass the selection." Xiaohua shakes his head. "But your esteemed teacher didn't seem to say that if the mirror spirit didn't react, we shouldn't try again using transcendence energy, right?" The girl shook her head like a rattledrum. "I have never heard of a physique with balanced 5 elements, much less a physique without any 5 elements. Fellow Taoist, you don't meet the requirements of my Imperial Thunder sect. Please leave the mountain as soon as possible." Motherfucker, Xiaohua was furious. However, the other party was only a 12-year-old girl. Perhaps she was a genius in cultivation, but in terms of conduct, he was afraid that he couldn't ask for too much. Just as the little girl turned around and was about to leave, Xiaohua's figure moved slightly, and like a gust of wind, he stretched out his hand and seized the mirror spirit. The girl was shocked. It wasn't that she didn't pay attention to the outside world, but she had been busy for more than 2 hours. Her previous curiosity had long disappeared, and she had already felt a little sleepy and had lost some of her vigilance. The most important thing was that Xiaohua's movements were too fast, and there wasn't even a trace of spiritual power fluctuation. Before she could react, the mirror spirit was already in Xiaohua's hands. "What are you doing?" The girl abruptly turned around, clapped her hands, and shouted with a thunderous voice. But just as she said these words, a scene that made the surrounding people dumbfounded appeared. The mirror spirit in Xiaohua's hands suddenly flashed with an extremely brilliant purple-red brilliance. That brilliance was like the scorching sun at noon, dazzling everyone's eyes. "This?" Before the girl could say a second sentence, she heard Xiaohua say in a very panicked voice, "This, what's going on?" Immediately, that scorching sun flew into the air, and with a boom, that scorching sun actually exploded in midair. Ah! Not only was the girl dumbstruck, but Shui Shui, who was sweating profusely for Xiaohua, and the surrounding cultivators who were watching the show were all dumbstruck as they stood there. Xiaohua's face was even more embarrassed, and he was at a loss for what to do. You dare to destroy I's mirror spirit? The girl immediately understood, and the tears in her eyes immediately gushed out. She clapped her hands, and several 5 lightning yellow talismans flashed with traces of purple lightning, and scattered towards Xiaohua. Xiaohua knew that he was in the wrong. His figure moved slightly, and he quickly dodged the lightning talisman. In midair, he called out very innocently, "Fellow Taoist! This poor Taoist only poured in a trace of magic power. This mirror spirit of your sect is really weak. You still dare to quibble? It must be because you were eliminated by my Imperial Thunder sect, and your heart was dirty, so you destroyed my Imperial Thunder sect's magic tool." How could the girl be willing to let it go? Her mouth berated, and her hands didn't stop. One of her hands took out a yellow talisman from her storage bag, and the other hand used palm lightning and other spells to bombard Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua was helpless, and he couldn't fight back. He could only use his flying technique to shuttle between the girl's spells, and painstakingly think of a way to escape. "Dui Ling, what's going on?" A voice came from midair. It was Zhen Yeming, who was in charge of the first round of selection. "Senior brother Zhen!" Seeing Zhen Yeming come over, Dui Ling's small mouth became even more depressed, and he almost cried. "This guy destroyed this disciple's mirror spirit. Senior brother Zhen, you have to help this disciple. Don't let this disciple go back to master to be punished." Sweat. Xiaohua felt ashamed in his heart. Of course, he had earned a trace of a chance to pass the Imperial Thunder Sect's selection, but this chance came at the cost of destroying Dui Ling's magic tool. He had really let her down. However, after Xiaohua felt ashamed, he also loudly complained about the injustice. It was just as he said, he had only poured his magic power into the mirror spirit, and although he didn't have the trace, he said, but who would have thought? The light that appeared was so bright, and the speed of the light was so fast. In the blink of an eye, it rushed to the other side of the mirror spirit, and the origin of the mirror spirit wasn't enough. The entire mirror spirit shook violently, and the light seemed to want to break through the mirror spirit. Xiaohua hurriedly withdrew his magic power, but the light was still there, and the vibration was still there. He could only throw the mirror spirit into the air. "Don't cry! Today is a big event for the Imperial Thunder sect. Everyone here is here for the first time, and there are many cultivators who didn't pass the selection. Your crying will make the Imperial Thunder sect lose face." Zhen Yeming glanced at Xiaohua and said to Dui Ling, hearing that it would affect the Imperial Thunder sect's reputation. Dui Ling's face tensed up, and he hurriedly stretched out his arm to wipe away the tears on his face, revealing a tenacious expression. "What's going on? How did you destroy the mirror spirit?" Zhen Yeming said coldly to Xiaohua. "Although fellow Taoist came to the Imperial Thunder sect to participate in the selection and is considered an important guest of the Imperial Thunder sect, if you don't put the Imperial Thunder sect in your eyes, we won't treat fellow Taoist with the hospitality of a guest." "Oh, senior brother Zhen," disciple Shui Shui was at the side the whole time. Shui Shui hurriedly stepped forward. Zhen Yeming glanced at the number plate in Shui Shui's hand and didn't refute. He nodded and said, "Yes, Shui Shui, tell me about it." Shui Shui recounted everything that had happened just now, without adding or deleting any details. Hearing Shui Shui's words, Zhen Yeming frowned and looked at Xiaohua with a complicated gaze. He then turned to ask Dui Ling, "Is what fellow Taoist Shui said true?" "Yes, what fellow Taoist Shui said is true." Dui Ling nodded and said, "This cultivator called Xiaohua doesn't have the lightning attribute, nor the fire attribute. He also doesn't have any other rare attributes. Therefore, disciple followed the orders of my teacher and eliminated him." "But your teacher..." Zhen Yeming was halfway through his sentence when he saw Dui Ling's eyes turn red again. How would he dare to continue? He knew that they were just inexperienced children who treated the words of their teacher as the golden rule and didn't know how to be flexible. He rephrased his words and said, "Cultivators with balanced 5 elements should have a white brilliance during the test. Didn't the teacher of the Imperial Thunder sect mention it?" Du Ling's face was blank as he shook his head and said, "They didn't mention it." "Oh, it's no wonder. There is only one person with balanced 5 elements in this world. My Imperial Thunder sect has never encountered such a person when recruiting disciples. If I wasn't in charge of the first round of selection this year, and specially read through all the ancient records, I might not have known about it." Zhen Yeming sighed. "So you don't blame me?" Du Ling raised his small face and smiled through his tears. "No, no. Leave this fellow Taoist to senior brother. Do you have any other cultivators to test?" Zhen Yeming smiled. "No, this is the last one," Du Ling said with a smile. The panic on his face had long disappeared. Zhen Yeming turned to Xiao Hua and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, I have never seen a cultivator with balanced 5 elements, but a cultivator without any 5 elements, let alone even my teacher's ancient records don't have any records of such a person. Could it be that fellow Taoist is an anomaly?" As he spoke, Zhen Yeming clapped his hands and took out another mirror spirit. He handed it over and said, "Fellow Taoist, don't use your magic power. Let I take a look." "Yes." Xiao Hua accepted it. Just as Shui Shui said, the mirror spirit didn't move at all. There wasn't even a trace of light flashing, not even the so-called white light. "Strange. Fellow Taoist Xiao, could it be that you are really an anomaly?" Although Zhen Yeming had already stopped Shui Shui's description, seeing that the mirror spirit didn't move and Xiao Hua didn't have any magic power fluctuations around him, he couldn't help but ask in astonishment, "Do you need I to channel my magic power?" Xiao Hua probed. "Fellow Taoist, please wait." Zhen Yeming shook his head and asked again, "Since fellow Taoist is already at Qi refining stage 10, then, which sect do you belong to? What kind of cultivation technique do you practice?" "This?" Xiao Hua frowned slightly. The cultivation technique Heavenly Law's embodiment technique had caused a lot of trouble in Yenyuan City. It was even related to the 1,000-year-old mother and son spirit fruit. He really didn't want to talk about it. "Oh, if you don't want to talk about the cultivation technique, then tell me which sect do you belong to?" Zhen Yeming tactfully asked. "Fellow Taoist Zhen, please know that I am a loose cultivator," Xiao Hua said helplessly. "I have practiced a fire-type cultivation technique called raising fire to the heavens. -6. Chapter 15-18. What? Loose cultivator? Zhen Yeming was stunned and said with surprise, How is this possible?" Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. "I am of course a loose cultivator. Otherwise, why would I enter the Imperial Thunder sect? May I ask how old you are?" Zhen Yeming asked curiously. "I should be around 23 years old." Xiao Hua did not dare to lie and said truthfully, "Oh, then fellow Xiao must have taken some pill to retain your youth?" Zhen Yeming was not surprised and looked at Xiao Hua with a smile. "Fellow Taoist is very lucky. Pills to retain one's youth are very hard to find in the cultivation world. And yes, I guess." Xiao Hua's reply was very vague, but his heart was moved and he thought to himself, "I was wondering why my face did not change. So it was a pill to retain one's youth. It seems that it is really hard to find, otherwise I would have known. Pill to retain one's youth?" Shui Shui's face was also filled with envy as she stared at Xiao Hua's young face in a daze. Of course, eternal youth was the highest realm that all women, regardless of whether they were immortal or mortal, pursued. "Oh right, fellow Taoist Xiao just said, what kind of fire attribute technique did you cultivate?" Zhen Yeming asked again. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, as a loose cultivator, actually reached the peak of Qi refining stage 10 at the age of 23. It can be said that you are a peerless genius. I am rather interested in fellow Taoist technique. Raising fire to the heavens," Xiao Hua said with a smile. "Raising fire to the heavens?" Jen Yeming thought for a while and said curiously, I don't seem to have heard of such a technique. All right, I will let fellow Taoist Jen know. This is a shallow technique, Xiaohua said with a strange smile. Jen Yeming looked at Xiaohua as if he was considering the authenticity of Xiaohua's words. However, the real thing was that his heart was in turmoil. No attributes. No attributes of the 5 elements. What does this mean? As the saying goes, jump out of the 3 realms and not in the 5 elements. Become a free immortal and live as long as the heavens. No attributes of the 5 elements. Doesn't that mean that you are not in the 5 elements? Of course, in the cultivation world of the Dawn Rain continent, there were no cultivators without attributes of the 5 elements. However, that did not mean that there were no legends of the 5 elements. No, it couldn't be said that it was the same as the legends. Because those legends without the 5 elements were all stories of great divine abilities and great cultivators, but there had never been any records of low-level cultivators. But this little rogue cultivator in front of him actually had no attributes of any of the 5 elements. What could this mean? Perhaps he was a genius in cultivation, or perhaps he was trash in cultivation. Forget it. No matter what, this Xiaohua can be considered a strange person. My Imperial Thunder sect has to be extra careful. Even if he's a piece of trash, I'm afraid he'll have to stay on my Sky Thunder Peak. Jen Yeming made up his mind. He looked at the dozens of cultivators who wanted to gather around him, and waved his hand. This has nothing to do with you. You can leave now and find a place to rest. The second round of the test is about to begin. Today, we will be recruiting 100 disciples. Although the quota is 10 times more than before, the real test is yet to come. Yes, when the surrounding cultivators heard that Xiaohua wanted to recruit 100 disciples, their faces showed a pleasant surprise. How could they still care about what attribute Xiaohua's physique was? Fellow Taoist Xiao, please follow me. Jen Yeming smiled and waved his hand, indicating for Xiaohua to stand beside him. When Xiaohua walked over, Dui Ling blinked her eyes and said, Senior Marshal Brother Jen, this disciple will also go over? Hee, Junior Marshal's sister Dui Ling, your matter is already done. This Senior Marshal Brother will report your matter to the Marshal Ancestor. You can return with the other Senior Marshal Brothers of the Converging Thunder Palace. After Jen Yeming finished explaining everything, he waved his hand and cast out a spell that was flickering with lightning. A bright light flashed around the 2 of them. Following that, a bright light shot out from the nearest round ball and the 2 of them disappeared from their original spot. Xiaohua only felt his vision darken. When he opened his eyes again, his figure had actually appeared halfway up a mountain. He saw towering palaces, pavilions, and all kinds of winding corridors and small pavilions. Occasionally, immortal birds would chirp and fly out from the dense fog that was rising from the mountain. Oh my, it really is like a celestial place. Xiaohua's eyes were envious, and he couldn't help but praise in his heart. Jen Yeming sent out a communication talisman. When he saw the communication talisman flying out of the palace, Jen Yeming smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao, please follow me. I will listen to fellow Taoist Jen's instructions. Xiaohua cupped his hands and said. Then, Jen Yeming led Xiaohua through a few winding corridors and passed through a few clusters of exotic flowers and plants. Gradually, they walked into the white fog. The wisps of white mist were like smoke and cotton, drawing Xiaohua's line of sight. A strange fragrance spread out from the little flowers on the ground, and Xiaohua's ears actually recalled the melodious sound of a flute. Xiaohua's eyes turned and saw that Jen Yeming's footsteps were steady, and he seemed to have turned a deaf ear to the flute. He knew that Jen Yeming was used to it. Xiaohua couldn't help but be curious. Who is the person playing the flute? Yeming, what's the matter? The flute sound suddenly stopped, and a clear voice sounded. Jen Yeming bowed respectfully and said in a concise manner, Reporting to Marshal Ancestor, during the first round of the disciple selection today, I discovered a cultivator without any of the 5 elements. Didn't have any of the 5 elements? The voice was clearly stunned and he asked in surprise, Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. That cultivator held the mirror spirit in his hand and the mirror spirit didn't have any reaction. Zhen Yiming said word by word. Furthermore, that cultivator poured his magic power into the mirror spirit and the mirror spirit actually exploded. How is that possible? As he spoke, a figure suddenly appeared from the white fog and stood 10 feet away from Xiaohua. Ah! A golden core cultivator? Although Xiaohua was already mentally prepared when Zhen Yiming called him martial ancestor, when he saw that he couldn't detect that cultivator's cultivation, his heart couldn't help but jump. Previously, when he was on his way to Jinghua City, he had seen a golden core cultivator, but after all, it was only by chance and he didn't have any direct knowledge of golden core cultivators. It could be said that the ignorant were fearless. After going through these 3 years of tempering, Xiaohua had experienced the fierceness of peak aura refining realm cultivators and the fierceness of foundation building realm cultivators. As for the divine abilities of Jindan realm cultivators, he only needed to think with his heel to know. Without any hesitation, Xiaohua bowed and said, Junior Xiaohua greets Senior. That cultivator looked to be around 50 years old. He was thin and the green robe he wore was very ordinary. The cultivator's face was clean and his eyes were slightly sad. Half of his long black hair was already white, but the white hair didn't make his sharp eyebrows and eyes lose their color. Instead, it made him even more charming. The cultivator waved his hand and said faintly, and it could be considered as returning the greeting. The sharp nails on his slender fingers were very eye-catching. Good boy. Xiaohua's heart trembled. He had never seen a male cultivator with such long nails. Yiming, give him the mirror spirit, said the cultivator. Yes, martial ancestor. Zhen Yiming didn't dare to be negligent, and hurriedly gave his mirror spirit to Xiaohua. Xiaohua took it and looked at the mirror spirit that didn't react. He then looked at the golden core cultivator. As expected? A strange expression flashed through the golden core cultivator's eyes. Then, he waved his hand casually. Xiaohua felt his body tighten and the true qi in his body was imprisoned. This mirror spirit really didn't react. The golden core cultivator waved his hand again and the imprisonment on Xiaohua's body suddenly disappeared. Pour your magic power into the mirror spirit. The golden core cultivator's tone was unquestionable. Yes, Junior. Xiaohua wanted to remind him, but he immediately shut his mouth and carefully poured a strand of magic power into the mirror spirit. Sure enough, just like before, a bright purple-red light flashed and suddenly rushed to the top of the mirror spirit. It didn't allow Xiaohua to withdraw his magic power. Seeing that the mirror spirit was about to explode again, Xiaohua held it in his hand and didn't know whether to throw it away or not. It was very awkward. After all, he was an Aurus Core stage cultivator. With a wave of his hand, Xiaohua felt a wave of magic power. A restriction that flashed faintly with electric light was set up around the mirror spirit. Moreover, it seemed to have some kind of power. It took the mirror spirit from Xiaohua's hand. Xiaohua took the opportunity to release his hand and saw the light and the restriction scatter. Another mirror spirit was destroyed by Xiaohua. When the light flashed, the golden core cultivator used his eyes to look at the remains of the mirror spirit. He nodded slightly and rubbed his hand. The lightning in the restriction flashed, and all the remains turned into nothingness. Martial ancestor. Zhen Yiming saw this and reminded. Did Xiaohua pass the first round? The second round of the disciple selection is about to begin. Nonsense! The golden core cultivator glared at Zhen Yiming and said, Although the mirror spirit showed that Xiaohua didn't have any of the 5 elements, this mirror spirit is after all a low-grade magic tool. The result is only for reference. It can't be confirmed that Xiaohua doesn't have any elements. But didn't you see it for yourself? Xiaohua's fire attribute cultivation technique is very good. Even the mirror spirit couldn't determine the purity of his fire attribute. Such a cultivator couldn't pass the first round of the test. Could it be that the Imperial Thunder sect only accepts lightning attribute disciples? Yes. This disciple understands. Zhen Yiming hurriedly bowed and replied. However, If he doesn't have any elements, the purity of his fire attribute cultivation technique shouldn't be so high, right? The golden core cultivator waved his hand and said, I will record this matter when we return. You can go and select disciples now. Yes, this disciple understands. Zhen Yiming turned his head and said, Xiaohua, follow me. Xiaohua's mind raced. He was considering whether or not he should tell the golden core cultivator about the pearl. The golden core cultivator took the pearl and turned around, leaving behind a lonely scene. His figure gradually disappeared. All right, let's talk about it later. Xiaohua muttered as he followed Zhen Yiming back to the pavilion. Zhen Yiming clapped his hands and took out a number plate and handed it over to Xiaohua. Fellow Taoist Xiao, this is your number plate. Please keep it well and don't keep it in your storage bag. I look forward to your performance and hope that you can join my Imperial Thunder sect as soon as possible. Thank you for your kind words. Xiaohua clasped his hands. Following Zhen Yiming's hand seals, Xiaohua returned to the thunderous peak. -6. Chapter 15-19. How can there be people in this world who don't have the 5 elements? It's just that the fire element is hidden. The figure of the gold core cultivator appeared in a small pavilion in the depths of the dense fog. There was a trace of a smile at the corner of his mouth. As he spoke, he waved his hand and took out a very simple bamboo flute from his sleeve. It did not have the slightest trace of magic power fluctuations. He placed it in front of his eyes and looked at it deeply. Then, he placed it by his lips and a melodious flute sound slowly rang out. When Xiaohua returned to the thunderclap peak, it was already past noon. The sun above his head had already set slightly in the west. Fellow Xiao. Seeing Xiaohua's figure appear on the thunderclap peak, Shue's heart inexplicably relaxed. She immediately jumped up and raised her hand. Here, here! Xiaohua saw Shui jump up and down on the spot. His eyes unconsciously narrowed and he also licked his lips inexplicably. His feet didn't stop and he walked towards Shue's direction. Fellow Xiao, did you pass the selection? Shui asked somewhat impatiently. Her eyes were also nervously looking at Xiaohua. Since I went out, how can I return empty-handed? If I was eliminated, I would naturally go to the west side of the thunderclap peak. How can I appear here? Xiaohua said proudly. Seeing Xiaohua's proudness, Shui didn't feel annoyed. Instead, a trace of expectation appeared in her heart. It was as if Xiaohua was originally supposed to be like this. Shui curled her lips and said, Humph, just now you were almost there. If you weren't smart, you would have been sent away by the thunderbolt. Who am I? That little bit of intelligence is just a casual thing. It's nothing, Xiaohua said with a smile. Moreover, this Dui Ling is just a little brat. How would he know I's methods? I can deal with him, but it's just a piece of cake. Xiaohua's words were very self-satisfied and frivolous. However, Shui loved Xiaohua's words. She narrowed her eyes and said charmingly, Really? Who was it just now, trembling in fear? Who? Who? Xiaohua shook his head left and right as if trying to find the person Shui was talking about. Ha ha, Shui giggled and covered her mouth. After a while she asked, Who did Taoist Zhen bring you to see? What did he say? Others? Xiaohua's heart jumped and he secretly said, What? Others are others then, what about you and me? However, he said, It's nothing much. I just went to see a senior in the Golden Core stage and destroyed another mirror spirit. Then, he let I pass. Then, you really have no attributes? Shui asked with her eyes wide open. Xiaohua smiled and said, I naturally don't belong to any of the 5 elements. Only, whether or not it has any attributes. I can't say for now. Seeing Xiaohua's complacent appearance, Shui didn't believe him. But seeing that Xiaohua didn't say anything, Shui's heart became even more nervous. She said with disdain, If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. Who cares? Right at this moment, a loud and clear voice came from the many balls again. Fellow Taoists, the second round of the disciple selection is about to begin. Fellow Taoists, please place the number plates you just received in front of your chests, and follow the disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect to Thunder-Seeking Valley. Thunder-Seeking Valley? Xiaohua was slightly stunned. However, he saw that Shueishue's face was already slightly pale. What? Fellow Taoist Shui, is there some kind of trick to this Thunder-Seeking Valley? Xiaohua couldn't help but ask. Alas, of course. Shueishue saw that everyone had stood up. She slapped a flying talisman on her body and flew away with the disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect in front of her. She said in a low voice, According to the information I got from the Imperial Thunder Sect, Thunder-Seeking Valley is a dangerous place in the Imperial Thunder Sect. It's the place where the disciples of the Aura Refining Realm have to undergo trials when they reach the peak of the Aura Refining Realm. Ah? Reach the peak of the Aura Refining Realm? Xiaohua was shocked and shouted. Then, what kind of dangers are there? Shueishue shook her head blankly and said, That day, I only listened to it like a story. I didn't ask in detail. Stupid. You obviously want to participate in the disciple selection of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Why didn't you ask more? Xiaohua criticized without the slightest hesitation. I only know that the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple selection has to pass 2 rounds. This round wasn't included, Shueishue said with some grievance. If I had known earlier, I would have asked earlier. If I had known earlier, you would be a Foundation Establishment senior now, Xiaohua retorted. Shueishue was very unhappy. Just as she was about to retort, she felt the entire Thunderclap Peak shake. From the top of the restriction on the Thunderclap Peak, several waves of magic power flashed like ripples. As the waves of magic power swept past, Shueishue and Xiaohua's number plates also flashed with 2 faint brilliance. The brilliance of the light actually blocked the magic power waves. The magic power waves very calmly swept past the 2 of them. With a rumbling sound, a thunderbolt struck from the top of the restriction. It hit a cultivator about a dozen feet away from Xiaohua. That cultivator was about the 9th level of qi refining, but because he didn't wear a number plate, when the wave of magic power flashed past, it triggered the restriction. That thunderbolt was extremely fast and fierce. The 9th level cultivator didn't have any time to react before he was struck and turned into charcoal in an instant. Huh! What's wrong? Does this cultivator not have a number plate? Shueishue asked curiously. Or did he put his number plate in his storage bag? Is there even a need to say it? The 9th level of qi refining is the high level of qi refining. I'm afraid his physique doesn't meet the requirements of the Imperial Thunder Sect. That's why he took the risk to stay and see if there's a chance? Xiaohua had a look of sympathy on his face. Thinking back to himself just now, wasn't that exactly the case? While they were talking, a few Imperial Thunder Sect disciples flew over. They looked at the charcoal, cleaned up the mess, and flew away again. A 9th level qi refining cultivator, gone just like that. Xiaohua and Shueishue flew further and further away, occasionally turning back to sigh. The lightning-seeking valley was located within the Lei Mo mountain range. The towering mountain ranges on both sides were like 2 open doors. The entrance to the lightning-seeking valley was also square. From outside the valley, one could see the lush flowers within the valley. This place looks very beautiful. Could it be that there's a hidden danger? Xiaohua muttered in his heart as he looked at the seemingly ordinary thunder-seeking valley from afar. There were about 3,000 cultivators selected in the first round. Xiaohua and Shueishue were flying at the very front. When they arrived at Thunder-Seeking Valley, the sun was already setting. The Imperial Thunder Sect disciples led everyone to the entrance of Thunder-Seeking Valley. They turned around and flew away. At the same time, a figure flashed out from the sky with a thunderbolt. Thunder evasion! Shueishue exclaimed. Ah? That's thunder evasion. Xiaohua suddenly remembered what Qian Qinghua said when he met him in Shihuang Town. Your flying technique is very strange. It's even faster than the thunder escape of my Imperial Thunder sect. Yes, that's the secret thunder evasion of the Imperial Thunder sect. It's said to be the fastest evasion technique in the cultivation world. Shui Shui slightly nodded and said. Xiaohua's gaze fell on the figure that flashed out. The cultivator who used thunder evasion was actually at the middle stage of foundation establishment. He was about 40 years old. Greetings, senior. The cultivators were very tactful and bowed to pay their respects. The cultivator slightly nodded and released his divine sense to scan everyone. He waved his hand and said, Yes, not bad. You're all handsome cultivators from my country of Xi. Then he pointed at Thunder-Seeking Valley and said, Your second test is to pass Thunder-Seeking Valley. This old man is the host of the second test. As for my name, if you pass, you'll naturally know. If you don't pass, then even if I tell you, it's useless, so I won't say it. This? Xiaohua secretly laughed in his heart. Why is this foundation establishment senior so long-winded? As if he could understand Xiaohua's thoughts, the cultivator said again. This old man won't be long-winded with you. The second test is very simple. It's tomorrow morning. If you can smoothly pass Thunder-Seeking Valley, then you've passed the second test. This old man wants to remind you that Thunder-Seeking Valley is very dangerous. You must bring enough yellow talismans with you. It's just like when you're training in a dangerous place. You can't be careless, otherwise. The cultivator said he wasn't long-winded, but he actually reminded a lot of things. It was like a senior warning a junior about to go out and train. Only when everyone was a little tired of it, the cultivator said, Finally, this old man wants to say that the second test has a risk to your life. If you want to withdraw, then you don't have to enter the valley. All right, everyone, if you're ready, then enter the valley. It wasn't easy to wait until the cultivator said these words. Several cultivators in front of Xiaohua couldn't bear it anymore. Their figures immediately flew up, and they rushed into Thunder-Seeking Valley. Although Xiaohua and Shui Shui weren't in a hurry, they also followed the crowd and slowly flew in. Sigh, if you don't listen to the advice of an old man, then you'll suffer. Seeing everyone fly into Thunder-Seeking Valley, the cultivator sighed slightly. These 3,000 people, I'm afraid, half of them will die inside. But why don't these cultivators believe this old man's words? Soon after, the cultivator's figure swayed, and a thunderbolt flashed again. The cultivator quickly flew forward, passing over the nearby mountain peak, and headed towards the end of Thunder-Seeking Valley. Xiaohua and Shui Shui flew closer to Thunder-Seeking Valley. Seeing everyone flying forward like a swarm of bees, Shui Shui also followed closely behind. Xiaohua said in a low voice, Fellow Taoist Shui, please wait a moment. Why? Although Shui Shui slowed down, seeing everyone flying further and further away, she was somewhat puzzled. Many people make light work. Although this Thunder-Seeking Valley is dangerous, with many people passing through, we can naturally overcome these difficulties. Why don't you follow the crowd? You know full well that Thunder-Seeking Valley is dangerous. It's the place where the high-level disciples of the Imperial Thunder sect train. Can the dangers inside be dealt with by many people? Xiaohua was unhurried. Moreover, the second stage's requirement is only to pass through Thunder-Seeking Valley in the wee hours of the morning. It's not like it depends on who gets there first. Wouldn't it be fine as long as we safely arrive before daybreak? Soon after, Xiaohua looked ahead, and said with a smile, Of course, if fellow Taoist Shui doesn't agree, then you can fly away with them first. -6. Chapter 15:20. Looking at the crowd not far away, Shui Shui hesitated for a moment and sighed. Forget it, I'll listen to you this time. However, fellow Taoist Shui has to be responsible for I. What? Xiaohua was stunned and thought to himself. These words, don't they have some other meaning? These words were very ambiguous. After Shui Shui finished speaking, she immediately came to her senses and said hesitantly, If there's danger, those cultivators will only care about their own safety. Who would care about I? It's better to obediently walk at the back. Since fellow Taoist Shui understands, that's good. Xiaohua nodded and then looked to the left. The two of them weren't the only smart ones. About 10 meters away from them, there were also dozens of cultivators who were either crossing their arms, standing with their hands behind their backs, or floating in the air. They were all coldly looking at the people flying in front of them. Fellow Taoist Xiao, what should we do? Shui also looked and asked in a low voice. Act according to the circumstances. Xiaohua smiled mysteriously. Act according to the circumstances? Isn't that the same as not saying anything? Shui pursed her lips and clapped her hands. She took out some yellow talismans from her storage pouch and handed them to Xiaohua. If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. You're acting like you're very profound. But, as soon as these words left her mouth, Shui felt some regret. It seemed she still hadn't figured it out. Xiaohua was now a late-stage 10th layer qi refining cultivator, not the low-level 4th layer qi refining cultivator she saw before. How could she be so impudent? Fortunately, Xiaohua didn't care and also didn't notice Shui's gaze. He looked at the yellow talismans handed over and took out 2, saying, Flight talismans. I don't need them. You can use them yourself. Ah? Shui opened her cherry lips slightly, and her mind spun rapidly. If he doesn't need the flight talisman, doesn't that mean he knows the flight technique? The flight technique. How could a 10th layer qi refining cultivator know it? Even a 12th layer qi refining disciple from a cultivation sect might not be able to grasp it, right? Xiaohua, a loose cultivator actually has this kind of divine ability. Unexpectedly, just as Shui was thinking this, Xiaohua took out several yellow talismans from his storage pouch again and said with a smile, I don't have many yellow talismans, but I have a lot of flying talismans. It's precisely for escaping. You. Shui didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but there was a trace of disappointment in her heart. It seems like Xiaohua should be able to fly. All right, fellow Taoist Shui, the cultivators in front of us have already disappeared. The ones behind us are still wasting their time. We'll take our leave first. Let's see what dangers this Seeking Thunder Valley has. Xiaohua waved his hand and used a flying talisman on himself. Shui also calmed herself down and nodded. I will listen to fellow Taoist Zhao's instructions. As he spoke, he followed behind Xiaohua. The scenery of Seeking Thunder Valley was beautiful. Countless fresh flowers and green grass covered the ground. Countless oddly shaped trees grew diagonally on both sides of the valley. Occasionally, there were even a few small streams flowing out from the caves of the valley. They flowed along the slopes of the valley. One could only hear the gurgling sound of the water, but one couldn't see the end of the stream. At this time, it was already dusk. Seeking Thunder Valley was located in an east-west direction. In the western horizon, countless clouds were like shredded cotton, covering the entire sky. The dim sunset was blocked by a thick layer of clouds. From time to time, a dark red light would seep through the gaps between the clouds, but before it could illuminate the valley, it was already diffused by the darkness of the night. It's a bit strange. Xiaohua paid attention to the surrounding scenery, but apart from being beautiful, he didn't see any danger. He couldn't help but ask in a low voice, Fellow Taoist Shui, are you sure this is the trial grounds of the Imperial Thunder Sect's high-level disciples? Fellow Taoist Shui? Xiaohua asked a few questions. Seeing that no one answered, he couldn't help but turn his head and ask again. Ah? When Xiaohua turned his head and saw that there was no one behind him, he couldn't help but get goosebumps. Just now, wasn't she still following behind me? How come she disappeared without a word? Xiaohua took a deep breath, calmed himself down, and looked around. However, there was only the sound of the wind behind him, and only the scenery that he had just walked over. Where could he see half of Shui's figure? Fellow Taoist Shui? Fellow Taoist Shui? Xiaohua raised his voice and shouted a few more times. Moreover, he turned around and flew back. The valley was still as quiet as before. There was no one in sight, nor was there. Not good! Xiaohua suddenly realized that the scene he saw when he was flying back was exactly the same as the scene he saw when he was flying forward. Not good, it can't be an illusion formation, right? Xiaohua immediately thought of what he encountered on Thousand Jiang Peak. Sure enough, when Xiaohua turned around and flew forward again, the scenery around him was the same as the scenery he saw when he turned around. When Xiaohua raised his head to look at the west, the sun had already set, and the hazy stars gradually began to appear. I'm afraid, Xiaohua thought. When he turned his head to look at the other side of the valley, it was absolutely strange. The stars in the valley also had the same appearance, but they revealed a dim starlight. Humph, Xiaohua sneered. He stood up, urged his magic power, and used the flight technique. His entire body was like a meteor, flying towards a section of the valley at extreme speed. According to Xiaohua's thoughts, when he was at the second level of qi refining, he could rely on his flying speed to break through Yulian Mountain's bewildering fog beast. This Seeking Thunder Valley's illusion formation should also be able to be broken through with the flight technique, right? Unfortunately, Xiaohua flew extremely fast. When he saw that the surrounding scenery was somewhat blurry, and it seemed like it was about to be torn apart by Xiaohua, the space around Xiaohua suddenly moved. For some reason, the surrounding scenery became clear again, as if Xiaohua simply didn't fly away. Good heavens! This Seeking Thunder Valley's illusion formation is really powerful. It's worthy of being a place where peak qi refining cultivators train. Seeing this, Xiaohua stopped. He frowned and thought to himself, there's no need to say anything. Shui is probably the same as me. Oh, all the cultivators must have fallen into this illusion formation. But how do I break this illusion formation? Xiaohua's figure floated in midair. His hands crossed in front of his chest, and he frowned as he thought. Illusion formation, how could I forget? Don't I still have my perception? Xiaohua suddenly thought, and immediately released his perception. Sure enough, in Xiaohua's perception, although he couldn't see any restrictions, he could still feel the outline of Seeking Thunder Valley. Therefore, Xiaohua slowed down his flying speed, and slowly advanced in the direction of Seeking Thunder Valley. However, when he flew a few feet in a straight line, he encountered another restriction. In his perception, every time he flew half a foot forward, his body would abruptly return to its original spot. It seemed like this was some kind of spatial restriction technique. Oh, so that's how it is. Xiaohua landed on the ground and took a step forward. From what the naked eye could see, he took this step firmly. However, from what the naked eye could sense, this step only swayed in the air for a moment before landing on the ground again. I've found the location of the formation. But how do I break the restriction? Xiaohua only practiced the art of making talismans and alchemy. This art of formations, he still didn't have the opportunity to come into contact with it. Xiaohua stood on the ground, frowning. He released his perception, and used his hand to touch his nose as he walked back and forth. After walking for a while, Xiaohua discovered that this space was only about 100 jiang wide. Moreover, this restriction also had the effect of isolating divine sense. Even if Xiaohua's perception it was blocked and couldn't pass through. Huh! That's strange. If this is an illusion formation, then shouldn't Shui be at the same distance as me? But why isn't there anything around me? But I don't know if there's anything behind me. Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled. Besides, where are the thousands of people in front of me? How? Ha! Xiaohua suddenly laughed, and walked back to the location of the restriction with large strides. He released his perception, and used his feet to continuously walk back there. 1 step, 2 steps, each step brought him back to its original position. Could it be that I'm wrong? Xiaohua scratched his head, but just as he was hesitating, in his perception, he actually took a step forward. Didn't I say so? This restriction definitely works sometimes, or else Shui and I would definitely be together. Xiaohua laughed loudly, and released his perception. Sure enough, within this 100 jiang, Shui was like a headless fly, flying everywhere, and her face was abnormally panicked. Xiaohua flew up to Shui Shui's side, and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Shui ah? Fellow Taoist Xiao, where did you come from?" Shui Shui cried out in pleasant surprise, but when her gaze searched for the origin of Xiaohua's voice, there was actually a blank space. "Huh! What's going on?" Xiaohua withdrew his perception. Sure enough, where he looked, Shui Shui's figure also disappeared. "Damn, this illusion formation is really powerful. It can actually meet but can't see." Xiaohua cursed in his heart, and released his perception again. He thought for a moment, and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Shui, don't panic, I will go over and pull you." Okay. Shui Shui responded, but there was an indescribable feeling in her heart. However, when she felt two fingers tugging at her sleeve, there was a trace of disappointment for no reason. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, can you see me?" "And I can vaguely see a bit," Xiaohua said vaguely. "This is an illusion formation, follow I." "Okay," Shui Shui responded, and followed Xiaohua's pull, slowly moving forward. Rumble right at this moment, a burst of fireball talismans exploded behind Shui Shui, shaking the surrounding valleys to the point of shaking. It was reckoned that Xiaohua and the other cultivators behind him had also fallen into the illusion formation. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, quickly leave. This illusion formation can be forcefully broken with magic power, but if it can't be broken, its counterattack power will be even stronger. This kind of Seeking Thunder Valley is a place of trial for high-level disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect. It's not something we can break by force, we can't let other people ruin our good fortune. Damn it, we just entered the valley. With such a powerful illusion formation, how can people survive?" Xiaohua couldn't help but curse. Hearing Xiaohua's words, Shui Shui's heart stirred, and she said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, in front, do you see other cultivators? Seems like there aren't any." Xiaohua seemed to have thought of something as well. "If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. -6. Chapter 1521. I'm afraid I was harmed by you." Shui Shui's expression was indescribable. Her pair of beautiful eyes stared at Xiaohua as if she was blaming him, and also acting coquettishly. But could she see Xiaohua? Xiaohua didn't think so much, but his face was still embarrassed. He smiled apologetically and said, "And I was too cautious. I didn't expect that this thunder-seeking valley was used by Imperial Thunder Sect's peak aura refining disciples. Most of us cultivators are in the middle stage or early stage. How can we compare to Imperial Thunder Sect's late stage aura refining disciples? If this thunder-seeking valley's restrictions were all opened, I'm afraid there wouldn't be many who could pass through, right? Therefore, some of the restrictions in this thunder-seeking valley are open, and some are closed. This illusion formation was probably closed when the cultivators passed through," Shui Shui added. At this time, she didn't have the slightest intention of blaming him. "And that's right." Xiaohua nodded slightly. At this time, the two of them had already walked to the front of the restriction. Xiaohua smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Shui, please wait a moment." After a while, when the restriction in the space stopped, Xiaohua pulled Shui Shui's sleeve and walked forward again. "Why did you stop for a while?" The two of them walked silently for a while. Shui Shui looked at Xiaohua and asked in a low voice, "Oh, nothing. I just found that illusion formation," Xiaohua said casually. But when he spoke, he suddenly realized that he could see Shui Shui's face. That pair of joyful and worried eyes were staring straight at him. "Oh!" Xiaohua immediately withdrew his hand and shouted, "Fellow Taoist Shui, you can see I?" Seeing Xiaohua's somewhat nervous appearance, Shui Shui laughed and said, "I could see fellow Taoist after we stopped for a while. It's just that fellow Taoist was busy rushing, so I didn't mention it." "Ha ha! Ha ha!" Xiaohua rubbed his hands and pointed. "Then we'll just keep going forward." "Go forward?" Shui Shui said curiously. "That's obviously a stream, fellow Taoist Xiao." Xiaohua patted his forehead and said with a smile. Fellow Taoist Shui, just listen to I. If we don't move forward, I'm afraid we'll still be flying around like before. You're the one who's flying everywhere. Shui seemed to have also heard the word fly in Xiaohua's words and rebuked him, raising her hand and saying, What? Xiaohua was a little stunned as he looked at Shui's snow-white wrist. Nonsense, you have to pull me. Otherwise, I know where to go. Shui laughed. Xiaohua's eyes flickered. His left hand hesitated by Shui's wrist for a moment, but he still reached back and grabbed Shui's Taoist robe. The two of them walked for a long time, stopping and walking like this, not saying anything else. Shui only followed Xiaohua. Even if it was a stream, even if it was a mountain wall, she didn't avoid it at all. She opened her eyes wide and only cared about walking. From the looks of it, she was extremely reassured by Xiaohua. The night breeze gently blew, and the starlight became even more brilliant. The atmosphere between the two people was somewhat strange. It seemed to be a kind of tranquility, and also seemed to be a kind of tacit understanding. In short, Shui didn't ask Xiaohua why he could see through this illusion array, and also didn't ask how he passed through this seeking Thunder Valley. We're here! Hearing Xiaohua's words and feeling Xiaohua's hand let go of her, Shui felt a burst of disappointment in her heart for no reason, as if she really hoped that the illusion array of this seeking Thunder Valley was as long as possible. What's wrong with me? Shui's face was slightly red, and she couldn't help but ask herself in her heart. However, before her thoughts turned, Xiaohua asked with concern. Fellow Taoist Shui, what's wrong with you? Did I make a mistake? Could it be? Oh no, nothing! Shui hurriedly covered it up. She raised her eyes and looked at the somewhat spacious area in front of her. There weren't any flowers or plants in the valley. I'm just very curious. This place is very different from what I saw just now. Why are there all bare stone walls? I don't know if we're still in the illusion array. Following Shui's gaze, Xiaohua said with a smile. If fellow Taoist Shui sees bare stone walls, then you're right. This place has already left the illusion array. Shui felt a burst of regret for no reason in her heart. Why didn't I say that the flowers and plants are still lush? Soon after, the two of them flew up one after the other. However, just after flying for several tens of feet and turning a few corners, Xiaohua suddenly stopped. Shui was somewhat absent-minded and almost bumped into Xiaohua's back. The strong aura on Xiaohua's body caused Shui to feel a burst of impatience, and her eyes flickered incessantly. Fellow Taoist Shui? Xiaohua asked again with concern. Was it, just now in the illusion array? Xiaohua obviously discovered Shui's abnormality. No! Shui's figure took a deep breath, and the slightly clear cold wind made Shui slowly sober up. Xiaohua was a bit worried and warned. Fellow Taoist Shui, I don't have any heart-clearing yellow talismans here. If you have any in your storage bag, it's best to use one. An illusion array? Maybe there's some hidden restriction within it. Seeing Xiaohua so concerned, Shui felt sweet in her heart and smiled. And I'll do as you say. As he spoke, he slapped his hand and took out a rarely seen soul-cleansing talisman from his storage bag. He urged his magic power, and the soul-cleansing talisman turned into a sparkling stream of water that poured down on Shui's head. With a schwa sound, Shui seemed to have suddenly woken up. Her mind was clear, and those beautiful thoughts in her heart just now all disappeared. I'm ashamed! Shui secretly shouted in her heart. Needless to say, everything just now was caused by the illusion array. Was there even a need to say it? The illusion array of Seeking Thunder Valley was used to test Imperial Thunder Sect's 11th level Chi refinement disciples. How could it be just a mere maze? More importantly, it was the erosion of the mind. Just now, Shui was running around randomly in the illusion array, and her mind was lost. She had long been confused by the illusion array, and an inner demon was born. In addition, she relied on Xiaohua, so of course her feelings were secretly born. If it wasn't for Xiaohua's timely reminder, this inner demon would have become even stronger, and in the end affect her cultivation. Many thanks, fellow Taoist Xiao. The trace of confusion in Shue's eyes disappeared, and with some lingering fear, she cupped her hands and smiled. If it wasn't for fellow Taoist Zhao's reminder, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Hee, there's no other reason, we're just mutually supporting each other, that's all. Xiaohua waved his hand, and then pointed ahead and said, I'm afraid that ahead is the true place to test the new disciples. Oh? Is that so? Shue's face turned cold, and looked in the direction Xiaohua pointed. She saw that in front of the bend, there were scattered some rags, some worn-out talisman papers, and even a small storage pouch. Let's carefully go over and take a look. Xiaohua extended his right hand's finger, and slightly pointed. Seeing Xiaohua's finger move slightly, Shue's heart also slightly jumped, and then she was greatly shocked. Could it be the effect of the illusion array still hasn't been removed? However, the feeling of her heartbeat was so enjoyable that Shui couldn't help but stare at Xiaohua's thin and tall back. That back seemed lonely, but in the loneliness, there was a kind of indomitable feeling. Alas, the feelings and inner demons of this world, who can clearly say which is real and which is fake? I'm afraid that when the fake is real, the real is fake, and when the real is fake, the fake is real. Fellow Taoist Shui, look! Xiaohua very carefully flew to the corner. Looking ahead, he saw that the valley, which was about 100 meters long, was perfectly straight. However, this perfectly straight valley was in a complete mess. Yes. At this time, Shui also restrained her emotions, and flew to Xiaohua's side. After looking, she nodded and said, This should be the Imperial Thunder Sex test. This is an offensive formation. If you can resist it, then you can enter the next section otherwise. Yes, since there aren't any corpses, presumably the Imperial Thunder Sect also left a way out. That number plate should have a protective function. What that senior said just now should be to guard against us. Yes, fellow Taoist Xiao, we have the number plates on our bodies. If we activate the protection of the number plates, we should be teleported out of this thunder-seeking valley, and thus lose the qualifications to be selected. Shue's face was also solemn. Looking at the debris left in this valley, she knew that this offensive formation must be incomparably powerful. Xiaohua clapped his hands, took out several yellow talismans, and placed them on his body one by one. Shui also did the same. AI, if only I had some kind of protective magic tool! Xiaohua's heart was moved as he thought to himself. Unfortunately, there were many things in Xiaohua's space, and there were also a few magic tools. For example, the Spirit Husbandry Sex Triangle, Yan Wei's Ring, Ling Jingyi's Shadow Moon, and Xiao Nan's Qing family's soul-absorbing bell. Unfortunately, these things all needed to be refined using the secret techniques of their respective sections. Xiaohua didn't have the technique to refine them, so he couldn't refine them. The only magic tool he could refine was Ling Jingyi's Shadow Moon, but Xiaohua had some misgivings about it, so he naturally couldn't refine it. Therefore, Xiaohua still lacked a suitable magic tool. What about the others? They were all things he took from low and middle-level qi refinement cultivators, so it was impossible for there to be any magic tools. As for the storage bag he got from the talisman puppet, other than some yellow talismans and spirit stones from the Fu family, there was nothing else. Let's see how it goes. If it doesn't work, I can only fly a bit faster. Xiaohua made up his mind, turned his head and said, Fellow Taoist Shui, stay closer to me. If it really doesn't work, I will fly a bit faster and see if I can pull you and escape. Okay. Shui nodded. She stretched out her hand, took out several yellow talismans, and flew to Xiaohua's side. Let's go! Xiaohua ordered, and the two of them flew inside at the same time. Woo! When Xiaohua and Shui just passed the corner, a gust of wind blew, and the sky above lightning-seeking valley was instantly filled with many dark clouds. Kacha! Immediately, several hair-thin lightning bolts struck down. Are you kidding me? It's actually heavenly lightning? Xiaohua and Shui were dumbstruck. This kind of lightning, which Qi refinement cultivator could dodge it. Fortunately, the lightning bolts didn't directly strike Xiaohua and Shui. Instead, they struck the stone walls on both sides. Zalala, the heavenly lightning struck down, and countless tiny lightning bolts appeared on the stone walls. A purple brilliance gradually emerged from the stone walls, forming a net. Then it flew out from the stone walls in all directions, covering Xiaohua and Shui. Damn it! Seeing this, Xiaohua couldn't help but curse. The entire valley is covered with this kind of forbidden technique. No matter how fast I fly, it's impossible for me to fly out in an instant. Those thousands of people. Alas, aren't they suitable for this kind of forbidden technique? Thinking quickly, Xiaohua waved his hand, and dozens of top-quality fireball talismans were taken out by him. He urged his magic power, and threw them towards the sky above his head. Shui was the same. Several yellow talismans flew out, and a fire net flew into the sky. -6. Chapter 15:22. Rumble! A series of loud noises rang out. The fireball talismans that Xiaohua threw out were extremely powerful, blasting away the lightning bolts that were falling down from above, creating a large gap. When Shui's fire net talisman flew into the air, the brilliance and power of the fire net talisman was far inferior to Xiaohua's fireball talisman. Top-grade fireball talisman? Shui was so shocked that she covered her mouth. She was very clear on how much spirit stones this thing was worth. She had never seen someone throw out so many without any heartache. Of course, you get what you pay for. Seeing that the lightning restriction was broken by Xiaohua, Shui was also delighted after her shock. Damn! Just as a smile appeared on Shui's face, an extremely large amount of spiritual energy of heaven and earth began to gather at the spot where the lightning had already dissipated in the air, setting off gusts of wind. One could see with the naked eye that in the gap created by the fireball talisman, flashes of lightning gradually appeared once again. Another complete lightning net quickly gathered together, and without any change in its trajectory, it spread towards the entire lightning-seeking valley. Moreover, this time, the lightning net was much closer to Xiaohua. Damn it, how did the cultivators in front pass through? Xiaohua cursed in a low voice. With a wave of his hand, he immediately threw out a dozen fireball talismans. Rumble! A loud sound rang out, and another large gap was created. Go! Xiaohua shouted and pulled his hand, grabbing Shui's sleeve. The two of them quickly flew towards the gap in the air, and before the lightning net could recover, they flew to the top of the lightning net. Hurry up and fly over there! Xiaohua pointed forward. Shui understood and urged her magic power to fly forward at high speed. Before they could fly more than 30 meters, a few more lightning bolts struck the stone wall. Another wave of lightning net formed above Xiaohua and Shui's heads, and once again scattered down. Xiaohua had no choice but to fly down a bit and throw out fireball talismans again. Fellow Taoist Xiao, quickly look below! Shui was very alarmed, and she lowered her head and shouted. Are you kidding me? Xiaohua slightly lowered his head, and immediately saw that the lightning net that fell on the ground just now was once again covering the ground, and it was not far from their feet. Without hesitation, Xiaohua threw out a bunch of fireball talismans again. After dodging 2 lightning nets, Xiaohua was just about to breathe a sigh of relief. Who would have thought that the 3rd lightning net would fall after it struck the stone wall? It's not over! Xiaohua was greatly shocked. If this continues, wouldn't this lightning net be endless? Hey, why didn't I think of flying up? Xiaohua looked at the 2 gaps created by the explosion. He waved his hand and pulled Shui's Taoist robe upwards. How Shui did not expect Shui would suddenly. Xiaohua's figure did not catch up. In a hurry, the Taoist robe in Xiaohua's hands was about to slip. Xiaohua's movements were also fast, and he grabbed Shui's wrist. At this time, Shui was also shocked, and she also reached out to grab Xiaohua's wrist. In an instant, the two of them grabbed each other's wrist at the same time. Shui Shui and Xiao Hua were both shocked, and they wanted to let go at the same time. However, just as they let go, they felt that the other party wanted to let go. Their hands tightened again, and they grabbed each other's wrists again. Forget it! Xiao Hua did not have time to say anything. He let Shui Shui grab his wrist, and he also grabbed Shui Shui's wrist, and suddenly flew towards the top of Thunder-Seeking Valley. Xiao Hua's flying technique was extremely fast. In just a breath's time, he had already rushed out of the lightning net and reached the top of the valley. If I had known this would happen, I would have. Xiao Hua's heart flashed with a trace of hope. Suddenly, a few strands of lightning as thick as hair flashed from the low clouds. These lightning bolts didn't strike the stone walls of the Thunder-Seeking Valley, but directly fell towards Xiao Hua. Ouch! Shui Shui could not help but cry out in alarm, and she grabbed Xiao Hua's wrist even closer. Damn it! Xiao Hua immediately waved his hand, and a pile of fireball talismans appeared again, exploding a gap under their feet, and the two of them fell into the lightning net again. Those lightning bolts fell on the lightning net, and in an instant, the gap created by Xiao Hua's explosion was filled. What should we do? Xiao Hua stopped in midair, and looked at the distance of Thunder-Seeking Valley, and then looked at Shui Shui. Shui Shui's face was red, and she quickly wanted to let go of his hand. However, Xiao Hua did not let go, and said in a low voice, Fellow Taoist Shui, if you trust one, then close your eyes. Don't use any magic power, and I will bring you out of here. Okay. I will listen to fellow Taoist Zhao's instructions. Shui Shui's heart felt warm, and her heart was calm. She closed her eyes, and the hand that had just let go grabbed Xiao Hua's wrist again. Rumble! There was a loud sound, and then, Shui Shui felt like she was a kite, flying up and down. The speed of flying up and down was extremely fast, and a burst of violent wind sounded in her ears. The wind was biting cold, and it blew Shui Shui painfully. She originally wanted to use her magic power to protect herself, but when she thought of Xiao Hua's warning, she did not dare to use the defensive yellow talisman. Fortunately, this time was not long. Without waiting for Shui Shui to count to 10 in her heart, Xiao Hua's figure stopped. However, after a while, Xiao Hua still did not let Shui Shui open her eyes. Xiao Hua, can I open my eyes? Shui Shui could not help but ask. Oh, of course you can. Xiao Hua's voice sounded, and then, Xiao Hua's hands slowly loosened. Ouch, is he doing it on purpose? Shui Shui's heart suddenly panicked, and she forgot to open her eyes. Fellow Taoist Shui, use the flying talisman, there is no problem here. Xiao Hua's tone did not have any joy. Okay. Shui Shui activated her magic power, and at the same time opened her eyes. She did not know if it was intentional or not, but her hand did not let go of Xiao Hua's wrist. Ah! When Shui Shui opened her eyes and saw the scene in front of her, Shui Shui could not help but cry out in alarm. About 10 feet away from the two of them, there was a lightning net flashing with a faint purple brilliance, blocking the entire passage of Thunder-Seeking Valley from top to bottom. There was simply no gap for them to fly through. Fellow Taoist Shui, let go of your hand first. Xiao Hua's expression was somewhat gloomy, and he said in a low voice. Yes, Shui Shui's voice was like a mosquito's buzzing. She let go of his hand, but at the same time, she could not help but look back. Not far away, there was also an extremely large amount of rolling lightning net that had not completely disappeared, and its power was still not reduced, sealing off Thunder-Seeking Valley. Alas, if it was not for Xiao Hua this trial, I'm afraid it would be impossible for me to pass. Such a long distance, I don't know how did he fly so fast? It seems like he flew faster than Uncle? Shui Shui rejoiced, and also thought of those cultivators behind them just now. She did not know what method those people used to pass through here. Fellow Taoist Shui, this lightning net is from top to bottom. If we directly fly over it, I'm afraid the lightning within the clouds will strike down again. Xiao Hua frowned and said, And this lightning, may not necessarily take our lives, but if we are hit, the thunder-controlling sex number plate will definitely be activated, and our qualifications will also inevitably be lost. Fellow Taoist, do you have any methods? Hee, Xiaohua, only now did you think to ask me? Shue's face revealed a smile, and she clapped her hand. An embroidered ball-like magic artifact appeared. On the round embroidered ball, there were extremely many openings, and all around the openings were fine runes that faintly flickered with magic power. This is... Xiaohua's brows relaxed, and he asked in a low voice. This is naturally my Misty Mountain's ancestral magic artifact, Jade Glyph, Shue said proudly. Ah? Jade Talisman? Xiaohua was greatly shocked, and he looked at the Jade Glyph very eagerly. Of course not, Shue said sweetly. This is only a magic artifact, not a Jade Talisman. But magic artifacts need divine sense. You're only at the 7th level of Qi refining, how can you control it? Xiaohua asked even though he already knew the answer. Hee, Xiaohua, are you really a loose cultivator? Haven't you heard that the ancestral magic artifacts of cultivation aristocratic families all have a kind of secret method to control them? Shue didn't conceal anything, and she took out an old yellow talisman from her storage pouch, waving it as she said, This yellow talisman was made by our ancestors. Only my Misty Mountain's bloodline can use it. But... Xiaohua's eyes turned, and he hesitated to speak. What's wrong? Shue stopped using magic power and asked curiously. No, nothing. I just want to ask, if I don't have Misty Mountain's bloodline, can this jade glyph not be controlled? Xiaohua waved his hand. He actually wanted to ask, Shue has Misty Mountain's bloodline, but she's a woman after all. Then, can her descendants also be controlled? This kind of question naturally wasn't good to ask directly, so he changed the topic. And this yellow talisman was prepared for us Qi refining cultivators. If you have my Misty Mountain sacrificial refining technique, you can naturally control it. Shue didn't suspect anything, and she used her magic power to place the yellow talisman on her body. Soon after, she cast an obscure spell, and from the center of the jade glyph, a white mist gradually diffused out. Looking at the increasing amount of mist, Shue continued to say, Or you can use a common sacrificial refining spell to refine these magic artifacts. Although those spells can't completely release the magic artifact's power, it's still much better than not being able to use them. Huh! Then, fellow Taoist Shue, do you have such a common sacrificial refining spell? Xiaohua was delighted, and he quickly asked. Shue smiled bitterly. My Misty Mountain is a cultivation aristocratic family, how could we have such a spell? If fellow Taoist enters the Imperial Thunder Sect, you can see if they have such a spell. Oh, so it's like that. Xiaohua nodded. Not long after, enough white mist flew out from the jade glyph, and Shue once again used her magic power to hold the jade glyph in her hand. The jade glyph flashed with a few faint rays of light, and the white mist scattered in the air and surrounded Xiaohua and Shue, just like a large ball of white cotton. Will this work? Xiaohua was somewhat doubtful. Hee, fellow Taoist Xiao, don't worry. Since there were cultivators who passed before, they must have also used their ancestral magic artifacts. I don't believe that a 10th layer Qi refining cultivator like you can't do anything, so they can pass without using magic artifacts. Shue was full of confidence. -6. Chapter 1523. All right. Seeing the confidence on Shue's face, Xiaohua could only nod. Of course, Xiaohua, let's use some yellow talismans like the Vajra talisman. Shue clapped her hands and took out some defensive yellow talismans for Xiaohua. This? If the white mist can't block the lightning net, what's the use of the Vajra talisman? Xiaohua curled his lips in his heart, but he still took the yellow talisman and used his magic power to place it on his body. And Xiaohua, be careful and follow closely. Don't leave the white mist! Shue warned again, and then used her magic power to activate the jade engraving to control the white mist. The two of them flew into the lightning net at the same time. Xiaohua didn't dare to release his perception completely, but he still wanted to see the effects of the jade engraving, so he only released a little of his perception and paid attention to the changes in the white mist outside the jade engraving. As expected, the jade engraving was effective. When Xiaohua and Shuai flew in front of the lightning net, before they entered, a part of the white mist had already merged into the lightning net. Zilala! After the lightning struck the white mist flashed with a faint purple brilliance and blocked the lightning outside. Great! Xiaohua almost clapped his hands and thought, if I can refine a magic artifact, that spirit husbandry sex triangle can also release a ring. I reckon it can also pass through this lightning net. Shuai saw that the white mist was effective and said with a smile, Xiaohua, be careful. We're going in now. Okay, I know, Xiaohua said with a smile. As they spoke, Shuai controlled the white mist and the two of them entered the lightning net. Once the white mist entered the lightning net, it was like a drop of water falling into a pot of boiling oil. Around the white mist, sizzling sounds could be heard, and at the edge of the white mist, purple brilliance kept flickering. Of course, all the lightning was blocked outside the white mist, and Xiaohua and Shuai were unharmed. Hee, how is it? Shuai turned her face and said to Xiaohua as if showing off her favorite toy. Is there anything else? It's great, Xiaohua said with a smile. Shuai was excited and said with a smile, Uncle wanted me to take it, but I wasn't willing. Now that I think about it, it's a loss. Xiaohua smiled without saying anything. Then, the two of them flew slowly as if they were taking a stroll. However, after the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Shuai's expression turned ugly. What's wrong? Xiaohua was very sensitive. Xiaohua, I was too arrogant. Shuai's face gradually turned pale. I didn't expect this lightning net to be so long. My magic power. I'm afraid I won't be able to last much longer. Ah? Xiaohua was shocked and asked anxiously, How long can it last? At this moment, Shuai tightly clenched her teeth and didn't speak anymore. Needless to say, she was trying her best to activate her Fali. Can you use my mana? Xiaohua was very anxious. He stretched out his hand and grabbed Shuai's wrist. His magic power rushed over like a flood. It would have been fine if Xiaohua's magic power didn't enter, but as soon as his magic power entered, it immediately disturbed Shuai's magic power. Shuai's true qi in her meridians was already exhausted. No matter how she mobilized Xiaohua's magic power, if the two of them knew some kind of joint attack technique, then Xiaohua would have been able to control the jade carving at the very beginning. Now that he channeled his magic power, not to mention that the two of them didn't know any joint attack technique, they couldn't fuse two different kinds of magic power together. Even if the two of them could fuse their magic power, at this moment, Shuai simply couldn't mobilize Xiaohua's magic power. That magic power in Shuai's body could only damage Shuai's cultivation. With a pu sound, Shuai couldn't help but open her mouth and spit out a mouthful of blood. Immediately, the jade carving flashed wildly, and the white mist was sucked into the jade carving like a swarm of bees. With a zi-la-la sound, the iron cloak talismans, diamond talismans, soft water talismans, and other talismans on Xiaohua and Shuai's bodies were all destroyed by the lightning net. The yellow talismans used by qi refining cultivators were simply yellow paper under this lightning. They simply didn't have any decent resistance. With only a faint flash of brilliance, they were destroyed. Damn it! Xiaohua was greatly alarmed. Almost without thinking, he waved his hand, wanting to take out some yellow talismans from the space. But just as he took out a few fire net talismans, he suddenly thought of the bead in the space. At this moment, the bead was still flickering with lightning. It attracted a lot of clouds in the space, and there were also lightning echoing in the clouds. Many areas in the space were covered with lightning. This is it! Thinking back to the day when he took this bead out of the space, Xiaohua was delighted. Without hesitation, he took out the bead. Sure enough, as Xiaohua expected, as soon as the bead was taken out of the space, the originally dense dark clouds in the sky above Thunder-Seeking Valley became even more turbulent. An extremely large amount of lightning was born in an instant. Around Xiaohua and Shui, the lightning that was originally going to hit them suddenly changed directions. Like swallows returning to their nest, they all hit the bead in Xiaohua's hand. Not only that, but the lightning net of unknown length near Xiaohua was also attracted by the bead. In the blink of an eye, it was completely sucked in, revealing an empty valley. Xiaohua was pleasantly surprised. But looking at the lightning that was brewing above his head, the power of the lightning seemed to be much greater than the lightning net from before. Xiaohua patted his hand and put the bead back into his storage pouch. The bead disappeared, and the lightning in the clouds should have disappeared as well. However, at this moment, on the mountain walls around Thunder-Seeking Valley, there was a flash of brilliance. Countless talisman characters gradually appeared, and immediately attracted the lightning in the clouds. "Let's go!" Xiaohua naturally understood that this was the sign of the lightning net appearing again. With a pull of his hand, he grabbed Shui's wrist and flew forward. Zi-la-la! Xiaohua and Shui had just turned the corner of Seeking Thunder Valley when a series of noises came from behind them. Xiaohua snuck a glance and saw that the lightning net had formed again just a few feet away from him. "Damn it!" Xiaohua spat and said in a low voice. "Isn't this thunder-controlling sex trial too much?" "Xiaohua, you can't say that," Shui said in a weak voice. "The thunder-controlling sex disciples are all handsome in the cultivation world. If they don't do this in their own trial, they will lose face for the thunder-controlling sect when they leave the sect. Life is a small matter, but reputation is a big matter." Looking at Shui's deathly pale face, Xiaohua sighed in his heart and let go of his hand. He patted his hand and took out a parasol dragon pill that he refined and handed it over. He said with a smile, Shui, I don't have any good medicinal pills here. This is a parasol dragon pill. Take one. Shui was very clear on what a parasol dragon pill was. It definitely wouldn't be effective for her meridian's injuries. But on the other hand, this parasol dragon pill was given by Xiaohua. A trace of sweetness emerged in Shui's heart. How could she refuse? Taking the parasol dragon pill, Shui glanced ahead and pointed with her finger. Xiaohua, let's go forward a bit more. It's better to be a bit further away from this forbidden spell. And I'll listen to you. Xiaohua nodded. However, after they walked a few dozen feet and turned a corner, they couldn't help but be dumbstruck. What do you think? As it turned out, in front of this corner was a large open space. 1,000 or so cultivators who seemed to be in a difficult situation were all sitting cross-legged. Every one of them had their eyes closed and were adjusting their breathing. Ha! Seeing this, Xiaohua almost laughed until he fainted. He secretly said, I knew it. It was difficult for Shui and I to pass through these forbidden spells, but those thousands of cultivators had it easy for no reason. As it turns out, they were all hiding here to recuperate. From the looks of it, I'm afraid more than half of them have died. Seeing the strange expression on Xiaohua's face, Shui seemed to understand what Xiaohua was thinking. Looking at everyone's gaze sweeping over, Shui lightly touched Xiaohua's arm with her elbow, indicating that Xiaohua should restrain himself a bit. And let's go over there to adjust our breathing. Xiaohua naturally understood. He pointed at the open space beside the stone wall, and the two of them slowly walked over. When everyone saw that the two of them were similarly injured, their gazes also moved away, and they minded their own business to recover. Shui looked at Xiaohua pretending to adjust his breathing and secretly laughed in her heart. She put the parasol dragon pill into her mouth and took out her own medicinal pill, preparing to continue after taking the parasol dragon pill. However, when the medicinal liquid of the parasol dragon pill merged into her meridians and began to slowly repair the damaged meridians just now, Shui was dumbfounded. she couldn't help but exclaim in her heart. A supreme grade spirit pill? This parasol dragon pill, did it have the effect of repairing meridians? This sweetheart. When the medicinal power began to stabilize and repair her meridians, Shui Shui couldn't help but open her eyes a bit. Looking at the solemn Xiaohua beside her, a trace of sweetness appeared in her heart. He definitely didn't want me to know that this was a supreme grade spirit pill and was afraid that I would refuse, so he deliberately deceived me. Would I refuse? How could Xiaohua know what Shui Shui was thinking? Feeling that someone was watching him, he also opened his eyes. When Shui Shui saw Xiaohua open his eyes, she immediately closed her eyes again, leaving a trace of red on her face. That trace of red on Shui Shui's snow-white face was so obvious. Could it be, there's a problem? Xiaohua saw that Shui Shui's complexion wasn't good and was slightly shocked. However, looking at Shui Shui, other than her face being a bit red, everything else was normal. It didn't seem like there was a problem. He didn't know that in just a day's time, Shui Shui's impression of him had completely changed. In fact, when he thought about it, two strangers who knew each other, and fell in love, who could clearly distinguish which day was the key to the change. At this moment, the group of cultivators that had arrived earlier began to make some noise. Xiaohua wasn't injured, so he stood up and looked over. He saw that among these cultivators, there were about 10 high-level cultivators at the 11th level of qi refining gradually gathering together. Around these cultivators, there were several tens of cultivators at the 10th level of qi refining who also surrounded them, as if they were discussing something. The other cultivators all stood up and watched from the side. After a long while, they seemed to have come to a conclusion. The 10 or so cultivators at the 11th level of qi refining dispersed and gave orders to the several tens of cultivators at the 10th level of qi refining. The several tens of cultivators at the 10th level of qi refining then walked towards the other cultivators. Among them, a cultivator who was about 30 years old saw Xiaohua and walked over. -6. Chapter 1524. Fellow Taoists, please. That cultivator walked in front of Xiaohua, glanced at Shui Shui, cupped his hands in greeting, and said very elegantly, I am Ma Miaoming of Wanxi's Ma clan. May I know which cultivation clan fellow Taoist comes from? Xiaohua smiled and returned the greeting. Fellow Taoist Ma, I, Xiaohua, am a loose cultivator. HM? Loose cultivator? Ma Miaoming's brows inadvertently wrinkled. Although he tried his best to conceal it, a trace of disdain still flashed through his eyes. But that disdain was immediately covered up by elegance, and he said with a meaningful smile, So it's fellow Taoist Xiao. I came this time because I have something to discuss with fellow Taoist Xiao. Ma Miaoming had a smile on his face, and his actions were also refined and courteous, but his tone immediately had an additional layer of condescending feeling. How could Xiaohua not hear it? Looking at the clamor in front of him, and then looking at Shui Shui at the side, he nodded and said, Fellow Taoist Ma, please speak. I am all ears. Oh, it's nothing. Presumably fellow Taoist Xiao already knows that when we first entered Seeking Thunder Valley, there were more than a few thousand people, but after just passing through 2 formations, nearly half of the fellow Taoists died inside, and only a little over 1,000 remained. If we still blindly charge forward like this without any organization, I'm afraid we'll all die in another formation, and there won't be too many fellow Taoists entering the Imperial Thunder sect. Ma Miaoming pointed again and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao already saw just now that the few fellow Taoists with the highest cultivation bases in my cultivation clan are merciful and thinking about the future of the fellow Taoists. They want to organize all the fellow Taoists and advance and retreat together under their orders. This way, more fellow Taoists can pass through Seeking Thunder Valley. HM! That's a good idea. Xiaohua pinched his chin and nodded. This is a good thing that benefits others and oneself. I naturally have reasons to agree. Ma Miaoming looked at Xiaohua with a smile that wasn't a smile, as if looking at a country bumpkin. After Xiaohua finished speaking, he said, However, these fellow Taoists still have some requests. Request? A trace of vigilance appeared in Xiaohua's heart. He said curiously, Fellow Taoists, please speak. Haha, it's not a big deal. These fellow Taoists are all at the 11th layer of qi refining. If they can't pass through Thunder-Seeking Valley, then I'm sure we can't either. Since they want us to pass together, they'll have to put in a lot more effort than if they were to pass alone. That's why they want to. Ma Miaoming thought for a moment before continuing. If any of you pass through Thunder-Seeking Valley under their command, then when you enter the Imperial Thunder Sect in the future, you'll need to listen to them. Xiaohua slightly frowned. He was already displeased in his heart. If it was some yellow talisman, spirit stones and the like, then it would be fine to give it to them in a short period of time. However, they were actually scheming for the future matters of the Imperial Thunder Sect. This was a bit too much. Listening to everything he said, I'm afraid I won't have the freedom to speak for myself in the future. You haven't even entered the Imperial Thunder Sect, and you're already forming your own faction. This disciple of a cultivation family is indeed extraordinary. Xiaohua thought to himself. Just as he was about to refuse, Ma Miaoming said without any sense of propriety. Of course, this is only the first condition. Huh! There's a second condition? Xiaohua was greatly surprised. He wanted to get to the bottom of it. What's that? These few fellow Taoists only have the strength to lead the cultivators who are not injured. As long as there are some injuries, they don't want them at all. Ma Miaoming glanced at Xue Xue. Humph. Xue Xue opened her eyes and coldly swept a glance at Ma Miaoming. She sneered and said, Fellow Taoists, come up with a plan. Hee hee. Ma Miaoming was also quite shameless. His expression didn't change in the slightest. He cupped his hands and said, Seeking Thunder Valley is a dangerous place of the Imperial Thunder Sect. This time, we have just taken a few steps. The road ahead is still very long. Fellow Taoist Xiao is a loose cultivator. Without a good friend, I'm afraid it won't be easy to pass through this Seeking Thunder Valley. Besides, even if fellow Taoist Xiao enters the Imperial Thunder Sect, a lone loose cultivator, I'm afraid, there won't be any future prospects. This is a good opportunity. If it was me, I would have laughed until my teeth fell out. Fellow Taoist Xiao had better think carefully. Finished speaking, Ma Miaoming turned around and went to persuade the other cultivators. A disciple of a cultivator family, your methods are quite high. Xiaohua looked at Ma Miaoming's back and sneered. AI, who asked the world of cultivators to be so cruel? There are only so many cultivation methods, only so many spirit stones, and only so many opportunities to enter the Imperial Thunder Sect. Who wouldn't want to fight for it? Xue Xue sighed and closed her eyes to adjust her breathing. She was very confident in Xiaohua and knew that he wouldn't abandon her. The requirements of these cultivator family disciples were indeed very harsh. However, seeing that they could pass the test and enter the Imperial Thunder Sect, this kind of temptation wasn't something that people like Xiaohua could refuse. In just the time it took for an incense stick to burn, most of the cultivators followed them. And that Ma Miaoming didn't come to find Xiaohua again. However, Xiaohua saw clearly that after Ma Miaoming went back, he whispered something in the ear of an 11th level qi refining cultivator, and that cultivator also looked at Xiaohua. Even when he saw Xiaohua's indifferent gaze, his eyes flashed with a trace of fierceness. After a long while, this cultured and refined cultivator, who was about 30 years old, flew into the air and said with a smile, Well, I am indebted to everyone's favor. If you follow us, then we will certainly do our best to ensure that everyone passes. Not only for the second test, but also for the third test that is about to come. I promise that I will give everyone a satisfactory answer. I also believe that everyone here doesn't need to make any blood oath or heart oath. In the future, you only need to remember today's promise. Who is this? Xiaohua looked at this mid-stage 11th level qi refining cultivator and asked in a low voice. Xue Xue glanced at him and said, Chang Lotus Village's Jiangming Xiao. He can be considered as the leader of the younger generation in our country of Xi. Since childhood, he has been intelligent and a cultivation genius. He has always wanted to enter the 3 major cultivation sects, but the opportunities were always bad and he didn't succeed. Surnamed Jiang? Xiaohua looked at Jiang Mingxiao and felt an inexplicable dislike in his heart. Yes, Jiang as in Jiang Shui. Shui didn't understand and explained. Good, good. Xiaohua shouted twice and then ignored him. At this time, there were many cultivators gathered around Jiang Mingxiao. There were 10th level qi refining cultivators and 9th level qi refining cultivators. They were all fighting to speak to Jiang Mingxiao. It seemed like they were prepared to rely on Jiang Mingxiao. It was very obvious that there were about 15 11th level qi refining cultivators and about 800 to 900 uninjured cultivators. They were basically evenly divided into 15 small factions. Fellow Taoists, are you all ready? Jiang Mingxiao said in a clear voice. Senior Marshal Brother Jiang, we have been ready for a long time. Let's go! The crowd around Jiang Mingxiao shouted. Good, it's still not far from daybreak. We should go a step earlier. As Jiang Mingxiao spoke, he cupped his hands towards the dozen or so 11th level qi refining cultivators and said, I will go first. After he finished speaking, his figure flew towards the valley entrance on the other side of the open space. The cultivators around him also flew. Fellow Taoist Shui, how are your injuries? Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and looked for a moment, then turned his head and asked. It's about time. If fellow Taoist Xiao is in a hurry, we can set off now. Shui stopped regulating her breath and prepared to stand up. No hurry. Just as Xiaohua uttered these 2 words, a huge thunderbolt suddenly appeared in the already slightly bright sky. That thunderbolt faintly emitted electric sparks and fire arcs in the night, and a kind of oppressive aura silently pressed down in the pitch-black darkness. This is... Not to mention Xiaohua, everyone raised their heads in surprise. They didn't understand what this thunderbolt was doing at this time. Jiang Mingxiao and the group of cultivators also stopped at this time. Their figures floated in the air and waited quietly. Zilala, there was another burst of thunder and lightning. A huge purple brilliance shot out from the thunderbolt and shot towards the valley entrance in front of Jiang Mingxiao. Swoosh! When that brilliance landed at the valley entrance, a layer of faint purple brilliance emerged from the valley entrance and poured into the valley like mercury. What is the meaning of this? At this time, Xiaohua and Shui also flew up at this time. From afar, they looked at the brilliant and colorful stone wall and the valley entrance with confusion in their eyes. Just as the cultivators on the thunderboat were waiting for the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple to speak, the thunderboat flew towards Kongzhou for another 100 feet and quietly stopped. It was as if it was watching a play. Ha ha! Fellow Taoists, this is a test given to us by the Imperial Thunder Sect's masters. They must be on the thunderboat. Wait and see our performance. If any fellow Taoist's performance is outstanding, they might be directly accepted as a disciple by these masters. Jiang Mingxiao said in a clear voice. Let us raise our spirits and show our true ability to the Imperial Thunder Sect's masters. As he spoke, he took the lead and flew towards the entrance of the valley. There seemed to be a barrier at the entrance of the valley. When Jiang Mingxiao's figure crashed into it, it was like throwing a stone into a calm lake. As his figure sank into the valley, the ripples spread out in all directions. Good, the cultivators behind Jiang Mingxiao also came to their senses. For a moment, they were all excited. Almost all of them rolled up their sleeves and rushed into the valley. When Jiang Mingxiao and the others rushed into the valley, the brilliance at the entrance of the valley returned to normal. Immediately after, the other 14 11th layer qi refining cultivators led the others into the valley. In the open space, only Xiaohua, Shui, and over 100 injured cultivators who had yet to recover were left. Xiaohua, why don't I stay here? Your cultivation is profound. If I don't drag you down, you can definitely pass the selection later. Shui's eyes turned a few times as she spoke faintly. However, her eyes were fixed on Xiaohua, wanting to see what he would say. And that's fine too. Xiaohua looked ahead and said indifferently. The injuries in your meridians haven't healed yet. If you force your way in, I'm afraid you'll be injured. If you fail to become a disciple and your meridians are damaged, the gains won't make up for the losses. It's better to stay here and rest. You. Shui didn't expect Xiaohua to say this. She bit her lips with her teeth and stomped on the ground a few times. She said, "Humph, I don't believe that with my 7th level qi refining cultivation, I can't even pass the second test." After he finished speaking, he activated his magic power and flew toward the entrance of the valley. -6. Chapter 1525. When did I say anything else? Xiaohua, who was behind Shui, smiled and said while rubbing his nose, "I only said that if your injuries haven't healed yet, you should rest for a while. Since you've already healed, you can naturally go forward together." Humph! Shui coldly snorted and continued to fly forward without stopping. This person. As Xiaohua spoke, he urged his magic power to follow closely behind Shui and entered the valley. Just after Xiaohua entered, a slightly immature voice came from the thunderbolt. "Fellow Taoists, this is the last test of our sect's disciple selection. All fellow Taoists must enter. If you don't enter within 15 minutes, you'll automatically give up the selection and be transported to the Thunderclap Peak." Ah? The remaining 100 cultivators were shocked when they heard this and immediately got up from the ground. They didn't dare to delay any longer and entered the valley one after another. After all the cultivators had entered, another ray of light similar to the one before shot out from the thunderbolt. When that ray of light shone into the valley that everyone had entered, the entire valley began to shake. Soon after, there was a rumbling sound as if the mountains were shaking and the earth was shaking. Then, the thunderbolt suddenly slid and disappeared into the darkness of the night. As for Xiaohua, he followed behind Shui and entered the valley. However, the moment he entered, several different sceneries swayed before his eyes. Xiaohua only felt a blur before his eyes, and then he was standing on top of a mountain. Beside him were only lofty mountains and precipitous ridges. Where was Shui's trace? Ah? Illusion array? Xiaohua was shocked. He really didn't expect that after passing through the illusion array, there would actually be another illusion array in this thunder-seeking valley. What made Xiaohua even more uneasy was that when he released his perception and wanted to find out the truth behind the illusion like before, he shockingly discovered that what he saw with his perception was actually exactly the same as what he saw with his eyes. This? Xiaohua thought for a moment, and knew that the ray of light shot out from the thunderbolt just now was precisely to stimulate this illusion array. Moreover, this illusion array was the real illusion array of Thunder-Seeking Valley. It was definitely not something that a 10th level qi refining cultivator like him could see through. Shui! Xiaohua thought for a moment and shouted. Waves of echoes echoed from the valley below the mountain, but no one responded. "I'm afraid this illusion array is divided into many parts. Shui and I didn't come in together, so we must have been assigned to different areas. Even if we came in together, I'm afraid we would be separated." Xiaohua comprehended something, then he urged his transcendence energy, and used the flight technique, flying high into the air. He raised his eyes to look at the vast expanse of lush greenery beneath his feet and said to himself, "How do I break this illusion formation?" Just as he was thinking, the entire world began to shake violently. Xiaohua's standing figure almost lost its balance. Before Xiaohua could fly up from the cliff, the mountain range under his feet began to rise with a rumbling sound. Looking around, there were also towering mountain ranges emerging from the ground with a rumbling sound. Around the mountain ranges, the previously lush forests had sunk into the ground as the mountain ranges rose. Streams of spring water gushed out, forming lakes. There were also some that were directly crushed into mud by the mountain peaks and disappeared. Xiaohua was stunned. Although he knew that this was an illusory array, he still couldn't help but be shocked by everything that was happening before his eyes. "I also don't know, what realm must I cultivate to be able to have this kind of divine ability that can move mountains and overturn seas?" While Xiaohua's eyes were burning with envy, he suddenly thought of the black dots, light, and the evolution of earth, fire, wind, and lightning that he saw while he was unconscious. His heart unconsciously rippled. This divine ability that can move mountains and overturn seas is already so terrifying, then the evolution of earth, fire, wind, and lightning is probably a divine ability that can create the universe. Then, just how majestic is it? Xiaohua's chest couldn't help but rise with a kind of heroic spirit. He opened his mouth and let out a long roar. The rumbling sound of the trembling actually couldn't suppress this long roar. Ha ha ha! This young master wants to see when this young master can reach the level of creation and move mountains and overturn seas. Just as Xiaohua's voice fell, there was a sharp sound. From below Xiaohua's body, the mountain range that had just risen abruptly split into two halves. Scorching hot magma gushed out from the mountain range and rushed straight towards Xiaohua's body. Come on! Xiaohua let out a loud shout as he circulated his magic power. His figure flickered as he used the fire escape technique. His feet landed on the magma, and his entire body moved along with the magma. At first glance, it looked as if he was stepping on fire. Fellow Taoists! Just as Xiaohua stood on top of the magma and very carefully walked forward, a voice sounded. Following this voice, the trembling of the entire world suddenly stopped. The magma under Xiaohua's feet also quickly cooled down and turned into crimson rocks. This is the illusory formation that my Imperial Thunder Sect's 12th layer Qi refinement disciples use to test their cultivation. It is also the third trial that all fellow Taoists must pass. The voice was like the sound of nature, resounding throughout the entire world. Currently, the 1,218 fellow Taoists who are participating in the selection are scattered within this illusory formation. There are absolutely no other cultivators within 10 li of each fellow Taoist. Because this time, my sect wants to recruit 100 disciples, 1,118 fellow Taoists will be eliminated. From now on, no matter what method is used, as long as a fellow Taoist's number plate is snatched away by someone else, that fellow Taoist will be eliminated. And the more number plates a fellow Taoist accumulates, the higher his ranking will be. At dawn, my sect will open the illusory formation and rank the fellow Taoists according to the number of number plates obtained. The first 100 fellow Taoists will become disciples of my Imperial Thunder Sect. After the voice finished speaking, the entire world became silent, without the slightest trace of movement. Xiaohua didn't dare to be careless. He promptly released his perception. Sure enough, he didn't see any traces of cultivators in his surroundings. This rule is actually quite interesting. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and looked at the mountain peak that had just been erected in the distance. He thought. This young master thought that there would be some kind of arena at the end to compete for the top 100. Who would have thought that the final disciples would be selected within this illusory formation? Moreover, according to the ranking of the number plates obtained, 1,118 fellow Taoists will be eliminated. If one wants to enter the top 100, one must obtain at least 12 number plates. Then, 12 fellow Taoists will be eliminated. It seems that there were quite a few middle-stage Qi condensation cultivators in the open space just now. This young master gathering 12 number plates should be quite easy, right? Xiaohua had a smile on his face, and his figure flew up. He glanced around and then casually flew towards a direction. However, at this time, a splendid firework flew into the air not too close to Xiaohua's left. It didn't disperse for a long time, and soon after, another dozen or so similar things also flew up in succession, far and near. Eh? What's this for? Xiaohua was rather puzzled and inwardly said. Others can hide in a hurry, but these people. Oh, I understand. Xiaohua suddenly came to a realization. These are those dozen or so 11th level Qi condensation cultivators. They're calling out to the fellow Taoists who agreed to meet up with us just now, right? But the number plates are limited. Do those cultivators dare to meet up? Xiaohua was puzzled again, and immediately shook his head. Why do I care so much? This young master is going to gather 12 number plates first. With this thought, Xiaohua increased his speed. Sure enough, just as he flew for a short moment, a 7th-level qi condensation cultivator barged into Xiaohua's perception. This cultivator wore a crimson Taoist robe, truly eye-catching. The red-robed cultivator seemed to be fleeing, turning his head to look back from time to time. By the time he discovered Xiaohua, he was already in front of Xiaohua. When the red-robed cultivator saw Xiaohua's 10th-level qi condensation cultivation, he almost cried out in alarm and hurriedly changed direction. Unfortunately, how could he fly faster than Xiaohua? Just as he changed direction, Xiaohua moved in front of him and laughed. "Fellow Taoist!" A crisp bang rang out. The red-robed cultivator simply didn't wait for Xiaohua to finish speaking. The sword talisman in his hand transformed into a foot-long flying sword and directly pierced towards Xiaohua's chest. Xiaohua's brows slightly furrowed. Seeing the flying sword fly towards his chest with incomparable speed, he didn't have the slightest thought of dodging. He simply raised his right hand and slapped towards the flying sword. "Ha!" The red-robed cultivator was stunned. In his opinion, even if Xiaohua's cultivation was at the 10th level of qi condensation, he should have taken out a high-level yellow talisman to deal with this flying sword talisman. How could he possibly receive the flying sword talisman with his bare hands? 10th level of qi condensation. Sure enough, it's a high-level cultivation. On the other side, Xiaohua's expression was indifferent. He was still muttering in his heart. Only after cultivating to a certain level would I know what kind of disdain he had when he faced me, a 4th layer or a refining loose cultivator. Back then, when the Fu clan's talisman puppet faced me, I'm afraid it was also this easy. The gap between realms is really huge. Xiaohua sighed with emotion as he urged his magic power and used the thunder palm in his hand. A half-foot-long lightning bolt flashed out of thin air and struck the flying sword in midair. With a cracking sound, the flying sword was immediately shattered by the thunder palm as if it was made of colored glass. Immediately it turned into several pieces of paper and flew into the air. This high-level flying sword talisman, which in Xiaohua's eyes before seemed to be very powerful. Now, with a casual wave of Xiaohua's hand, it vanished into thin air. The red-robed cultivator was even more terrified. He slapped his hand and took out another stack of fireball talismans, wanting to throw them out. "Fellow Taoist, I only want your number plate. I don't want to take your life. If you continue to resist like this, don't blame I for being ruthless." Xiaohua's cold voice sounded in the cultivator's ear. Hearing this, the red-robed cultivator's face revealed a trace of relief. He softly said, "Is fellow Taoist's words true?" Believe it or not, I don't feel like explaining to you." Xiaohua stood in midair and turned his head to look at where the cultivator came from. He said, "I have limited time. I will only count to 6. If fellow Taoist doesn't leave the number plate on the ground and leave, then I will. Yes, yes." Seeing Xiaohua's anger, the red-robed cultivator didn't dare to be negligent. He slapped his hand and took out a number plate from his storage bag. He placed it on the ground and said, "I will leave the number plate here. I hope fellow Taoist will keep his word. Go." Xiaohua indifferently looked at the number plate on the ground and waved his hand. But just as Xiaohua was about to wave his hand, a hand suddenly reached out from the ground and grabbed the number plate in his hand. -6. Chapter 1526. Fellow Taoist. When the red-robed cultivator saw that the command tablet on the ground had been snatched away, he immediately looked nervously at Xiaohua. But Xiaohua wasn't the slightest bit nervous. Seeing that hand and the command tablet disappear into the ground, he laughed and said, "Take care of yourself and go." Then, the red-robed cultivator cupped his hands and said, At this moment, a strange thing happened. The red-robed cultivator's figure faintly flickered, like a candle swaying in the wind. After swaying twice, the red-robed cultivator disappeared from where he stood. What's going on? Xiaohua was somewhat dazed, but when his perception tracked down the cultivator who had just taken the command tablet, he somewhat understood. The Imperial Thundersect's disciple said he wanted to eliminate 1118 cultivators. I'm afraid this is the method of elimination. Just now, when the command tablet was about 1 zhang away from the red-robed cultivator, the red-robed cultivator immediately disappeared. He should have been transported out of this illusion formation. In other words, he was eliminated. The command tablet can't be more than 1 zhang away from the body. Otherwise, it will be regarded as having been snatched away and automatically transported out of the illusion formation. Why didn't the Imperial Thundersect's disciple mention this kind of thing? Xiaohua was bewildered, but he immediately formed hand seals and his body drilled into the ground. He used the earth escape technique and chased in the direction the other cultivator escaped in. The other cultivator was a person with a pointy mouth and monkey-like cheeks. He was precisely chasing after the red-robed cultivator from just now. Xiaohua had long since discovered that. When the cultivator with a pointy mouth and monkey-like cheeks saw that Xiaohua's cultivation wasn't inferior to his, he immediately escaped into the ground, wanting to catch him off guard. He originally wanted to sneak attack Xiaohua, but when he saw the red-robed cultivator actually put the command tablet on the ground, he naturally didn't hesitate to take the command tablet away. According to this cultivator's thinking, he was at the 10th level of qi condensation, and Xiaohua was also at the 10th level of qi condensation. Not to mention whether or not Xiaohua had an earth escape talisman, even if he did, he might not be able to catch up to him. Who would have thought that just as this 10th level cultivator fled for a moment, he heard Xiaohua's eerie voice from above his head. "Fellow Taoist scheme! You actually dared to take the command tablet away from I didn't want to take your life." Humph! The monkey-faced cultivator suppressed his astonishment, and let out a cold snort. He clapped his hands and took out several yellow talismans. However, just as he urged his magic power, an incomparably fierce force suddenly came from the space between his eyebrows. When he saw a black light instantly pierce through his earth escape talisman, and the yellow talismans around him, he felt a pain between his eyebrows and immediately lost consciousness. What's going on? Xiaohua drove the black iron needle into the cultivator's forehead, but a strange scene appeared. Just as the black iron needle pierced into the cultivator's forehead, the cultivator's body began to flicker. Just like the red-robed cultivator, the cultivator's body gradually disappeared, leaving behind 2 identical number plates in front of Xiaohua's eyes. "Oh, so that's the case." Xiaohua put the 2 number plates into his storage bag and nodded slightly. The Imperial Thunder Sect still has the intention of protecting the cultivators participating in this election. Inside this illusion formation, even if you lose your life, you don't have to worry and will be immediately transported out. And that's fine too. In this case, this young master also doesn't have any misgivings. At this moment, Xiaohua was truly awe-inspiring. This was also the first time he could hold his head up high after hiding from the 3 sects of the state of Xi. His magic power was truly much higher than his peers. Dealing with the 6th and 10th level of qi refining was simply as easy as reaching out his hand. Moreover, the reason why qi refining cultivators became qi refining cultivators was precisely because they drew the spiritual energy of heaven and earth into their body and refined it for their own use. This was merely the lowest level of cultivation. They could only rely on their magic power to drive the yellow talismans. Speaking of which, they couldn't even be considered to have crossed the threshold. Only after reaching the 12th level of qi refining and beginning to possess divine sense could they begin to rely on their own magic power to cast spells. Only then could they be considered to have truly stepped into the threshold of cultivation. Although Xiaohua was currently only at the 10th level of qi refining, he was already able to cast spells. In these past 2 years, he had repeatedly read through the book of foundational spells he obtained from the Feng clan. He had long since practiced all the spells in the book to the point that he was thoroughly familiar with them. This Thunder Palm was actually the most powerful spell in the book. Today, he took it out very easily, making a profit. Immediately after, Xiaohua randomly picked a direction and flew away. One after another, he found 2 cultivators around the 8th level of qi refining. These 2 were tactful. Knowing that they couldn't contend against him, they obediently took out their number plates and withdrew from the illusion formation. This is good. It's as easy as blowing off dust. Using reason to convince people. Xiaohua somewhat enjoyed this feeling of being an expert. If nothing unexpected happens, this young master will soon be able to gather 12 number plates. However, this was often the case. The easier it felt, the easier it was for accidents to occur. In the time it took for an incense stick to burn, Xiaohua didn't find another cultivator, regardless of whether they were high or low level. It was as if these cultivators were all hiding. Strange! Xiaohua released all of his perception. He even looked underground, but he didn't have the slightest clue. Looking at the color of the sky, it was already extremely dark. Presumably, this was the darkness before dawn. Before long, the sun would rise from the east again. This is bad! Xiaohua's heart jumped. His figure flew up into the air. Looking at the signal that was the closest to him, he sneered. Damn it! It seems this young master wants to test his luck! At this moment, without waiting for Xiaohua to urge his magic power, a faint divine sense swept past him from behind. It passed by Xiaohua's body and immediately locked onto him. Soon after, in Xiaohua's perception, another dozen or so cultivators appeared behind him. They quickly surrounded him from all directions. Humph! Xiaohua coldly snorted. He waved his hand and took out the black iron needle from the space. He quietly sent it into the air. Soon after, he took the devil's spear and a large stack of fireball talismans in his hand. He pretended to be ignorant and flew forward. Fellow Taoist! Xiaohua flew for a moment and sensed that the dozen or so cultivators had surrounded him. Then, he heard a warm voice call out from behind him. Xiaohua turned around and frowned slightly. The two people who appeared behind him were none other than Ma Miaoming and Jiang Meishao. Ha! Ma Miaoming saw Xiaohua and laughed happily. Fellow Taoist Jiang, it's this guy. I saw a few people outside the illusory formation. They were all very willing to submit to fellow Taoist Jiang. Only this guy ignored you. Everyone has their own ambitions. I have never forced anyone. Jiang Mingxiao smiled and waved her hand. What ambitions does he have? He's just a loose cultivator. Needless to say, he cultivated to this level by robbing cultivation techniques and spirit stones. Even if he wants to submit to fellow Taoist Jiang, we still have to carefully consider our own reputation. Ma Miaoming sneered. Fellow Taoist Ma, do you still remember that loose cultivator Chang Huan? How despicable and shameless. He treated fellow Taoist as his reborn parent. As soon as fellow Taoist left, he immediately. Fellow Taoist Ma! Jiang Meishao frowned with displeasure. I know my wrongs, I know my wrongs! Ma Miaoming immediately flattered. Fellow Taoist Jiang is a magnanimous person. You won't take this kind of trivial matter to heart, but I still feel indignant for fellow Taoist. Then she looked at Xiaohua and said, How could ordinary loose cultivators surpass the 7th layer of the qi refining realm? If he didn't use despicable means, how could he reach the 10th layer of the qi refining realm? If fellow Taoist Jiang makes a move, on one hand, we'll have another number plate. On the other hand, we can avenge the fellow Taoist who died in this guy's hands. I have my own ideas. Jiang Mingxiao waved her hand and stopped Ma Miaoming from speaking. She cupped her hands and said, I remember that fellow Taoist is called Xiaohua, right? Yes, that's right. It's extremely difficult for loose cultivators to cultivate. This is common knowledge in the cultivation world. Joining the Imperial Thunder sect is fellow Taoist Zhao's best opportunity. This is already the last hurdle. Fellow Taoist Xiao only needs to obtain 12 number plates to fulfill his wish and become an official disciple of a major cultivation sect. In the future, he won't have to worry about spirit stones, medicinal pills, or cultivation techniques anymore. What do you mean, fellow Taoist Jiang? Xiaohua was a little puzzled. Nothing. I just admire the willpower of loose cultivators like you. In a situation where you don't have anything, you actually manage to cultivate to the 10th layer of the qi refining realm. If it's It's absolutely impossible. Therefore, I want to give fellow Taoist Xiao a chance. Oh? You still want I to follow fellow Taoist Jiang? Xiao Hua looked at Jiang Mingxiao with a faint smile. Yes, I naturally trust others, but fellow Taoist Xiao is a loose cultivator. Therefore, I ask fellow Taoist Xiao to swear a blood oath that in the future, you'll only follow I in the Imperial Thunder Sect. If you do, I will spare your life and protect you. Who? Jiang Mingxiao was persuading Xiao Hua when suddenly, another divine sense swept over. Jiang Mingxiao frowned and scolded towards the source of the divine sense. Of course it's I. An extremely arrogant voice came. Then, more than 10 cultivators flew down from the east side of Xiao Hua. Wang family of Guangxian? Jiang Mingxiao sneered and said, Fellow Taoist Jiming, can't you see that I am doing something here? Hee, fellow Taoist Jiang, of course I can see you. Wang Qiming's face was sharp and thin, and he actually had a goatee under his chin. His eyes were slightly red, and he said with a sinister smile, The loose cultivators in this area have all been killed and those who should have fled have fled. It's hard to find an extra number plate. It's not easy to find an unguarded one here. I also came to take a look on behalf of my subordinate brothers. Fellow Taoist Wang. Jiang Mingxiao scolded. This fellow Taoist has already pledged his allegiance to I and is I's brother. This number plate. I'm afraid I can't give it to you. Is that so? Wang Qiming rolled his red eyes and said with a smile. It seems, this fellow Taoist hasn't agreed yet? Hee, fellow Taoist Wang, do you think this fellow Taoist won't agree? Jiang Mingxiao looked up to the sky and laughed loudly. Xiao Hua stood there and looked at the two people coldly. When he saw Jiang Mingxiao laughing, a faint smile also appeared on his face. He cupped his hands and said, Fellow Taoist Jiang, I'll let you know that I won't agree to this condition of being someone's servant. Ha! Jiang Mingxiao was laughing halfway, but at this moment, it was as if someone had grabbed his throat and he couldn't laugh anymore. A vicious expression appeared on his face. He clapped his hands and took out an earthen yellow sword talisman. He urged his transcendence energy, and the sword talisman suddenly expanded, becoming a huge sword more than half a foot wide. Jiang Mingxiao waved his hand and the surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth was absorbed by the huge sword. Then, just as Jiang Mingxiao was about to use his divine sense to urge the huge sword, Xiao Hua's figure suddenly stood up and he sneered. You want me to pledge my allegiance with this little ability? Go home and cultivate for another 100 years. -6. Chapter 15:27. After that, Xiao Hua didn't give Jiang Mingxiao any chance to swing his great sword. His entire body was like a gust of wind, and he instantly arrived in front of Jiang Mingxiao. Similarly, he waved his hand, and a dozen fireball talismans surrounded Jiang Mingxiao's body. Rumble! The fireball talismans were incomparably powerful. Not only did they blast Jiang Mingxiao to the point that he fled in a sorry state, they even disrupted the entire scene. Xiao Hua originally used the devil's spear tip in his hand, but just as he took it out, he remembered that there were many cultivators here. Moreover, even if he stabbed Jiang Mingxiao to death, he would only be teleported out of the illusory formation. The secret of his devil's spear tip couldn't be kept. Rather than that, he might as well not use it. Xiao Hua could be considered to have hit the mark by a fluke. Jiang Mingxiao was a mid-stage 11th stage Qi refinement cultivator, and already had divine sense. If Xiao Hua threw out the fireball talisman from afar, he absolutely couldn't get within 1 zhang of his body. Naturally, he wouldn't be able to succeed. At this time, even if Jiang Mingxiao had divine sense, the fireball talisman had already exploded within 1 qi of his body. He could only flee. Hee. Xiao Hua saw that Jiang Mingxiao's defense had been blown to pieces by the fireball talisman. His hands moved again, but right at this moment, an earth spike suddenly flew out from under his body and was about to pierce into the sole of his foot. Humph! Xiao Hua's figure flew again, dodging the earth spike. He turned his head to look at Wang Qiming, who was not far from him, and had a trace of astonishment in his eyes. Damn it, this guy should have gone to sneak attack Jiang Mei Xiao. Why did he attack me? Xiao Hua glanced at Wang Qiming. Although he was puzzled in his heart, he didn't pay much attention to him. Seeing that Wang Qiming had come to his senses and was forming another seal, wanting to attack him, Xiao Hua immediately circulated his magic power. His figure flashed as he closely chased after Jiang Mei Xiao. Moreover, the fireball talismans in his hand shot out one after another. Jiang Mei Xiao, who was fleeing in a sorry state, was incomparably depressed. He really didn't expect Xiao Hua to make the first move. Moreover, he absolutely didn't expect Xiao Hua's speed to be so fast. The fireball talisman was of such a high level. For a moment, he lost the initiative and could only flee outside. He wanted to avoid the fireball talisman first, then use his divine sense to deal with Xiao Hua. However, the fireball talismans were endless, causing Jiang Mei Xiao to almost vomit blood. Just as he steeled his heart, several net of ice talismans in his hand. He was prepared to take the opportunity to use his divine sense to resist the fireball talisman, and take the opportunity to take his magic tool. When suddenly, a swift and fierce aura from the sky, very sharply, the yellow talismans, the talisman's talisman, of course, of a sudden, of S2's, a sharp cheese sharp took the opportunity of his own tool. Of course, of S's, S to SS. I, of Estio's S's heads of his S that of his of course, of, hit S's of his, he of his of. Him's when he's he of. Humph. Xiao Hua sensed the magic power of his magic power, and with a wave of his hand, a half-foot-long thunder palm shot out from his hand. It directly hit Wang Qiming's SS of his, and immediately broke the of his. At the same time, Jiang Ming Xiao's figure disappeared. Crash! A series of sounds rang out, and unexpectedly, 14 number plates fell from midair. Xiao Hua was overjoyed. With a wave of his hand, the 14 number plates were all caught by him, and very nimbly, he put them into his storage pouch. From the moment Xiao Hua threw out the fireball talisman to the moment he used his black iron needle to kill Jiang Mei Xiao, all of his movements were as quick as lightning, far exceeding the expectations of the crowd of cultivators. Therefore, no one expected these 14 number plates to be his. By the time they saw them clearly, and their thoughts had just arisen, the number plates had already been put into Xiao Hua's storage pouch by Xiao Hua. Ha ha! The happiest of all was Wang Qiming. His entire thin face was flushed red. With a wave of his hand, he formed another seal, and his figure flew in the direction of Xiao Hua, chasing after him. However, something Wang Qiming didn't expect happened. Xiao Hua didn't flee. Instead, with a cold smile on his face, he actually rushed over just like him. This guy actually isn't afraid of death? Wang Qiming's brain couldn't quite wrap itself around it. The confinement technique in his hand was still unleashed. Crack! When Xiao Hua casually used a palm of thunder to break the confinement technique, Wang Qiming suddenly thought, "This is bad. Jiang Mingxiao's cultivation is at the middle stage of the 11th layer of the Qi refining realm. Just like me, he was killed by this guy. Wouldn't I also be no match for him? But he's only at the 10th layer of the Qi refining realm. Damn it, I actually still have to chase after him." Wang Qiming's brain reacted slowly, but his cultivation wasn't fake. When Wang Qiming came to his senses, his figure immediately rushed towards the sky, as if he wanted to change directions and avoid Xiao Hua. What a pity! Although he was at the 11th layer of the Qi refining realm, a layer higher than Xiao Hua's realm, how could his flying talisman compare to Xiao Hua's flying technique? Just as he flew into the air, Xiao Hua's figure appeared behind him. "Where do you think you're going?" Xiao Hua asked indifferently. "Xiao! Fellow Taoist Xiao, please spare my life!" Wang Qiming couldn't bear it any more and shouted loudly. "I was possessed just now. I shouldn't have attacked fellow Taoist. Since fellow Taoist has already killed Jiang Mei Xiao and collected all the number plates, please take pity on I. This little one only has 11 number plates. If fellow Taoist Xiao can let I go, I will enter the Imperial Thunder Sect. These cultivators in my hands will all be under fellow Taoist Xiao's command. Ah? The dozen or so cultivators under Jiang Mingxiao and Wang Qiming's command were all around the 8th layer of the Qi refining realm. Under the might of Xiaohua's dozens of fireball talismans, they had already hidden far away. They simply didn't have time to clearly see what was happening in the field. When the fireball talisman's raging flames disappeared, they saw a middle stage of the 11th layer of the Qi refining realm being chased all over the sky by a late stage of the 10th layer of the Qi refining realm. As he fled, he even begged for mercy. This situation, how could they not be shocked? Humph, this young master doesn't care. Xiaohua sneered. If you dare to reach out to this young master, then you should be prepared to be killed by this young master. As Xiaohua spoke, he also threw a large pile of fireball talismans at Wang Qiming's body. At this moment, Wang Qiming seemed to have come to his senses. This was an illusion formation, so there was no danger to his life. Seeing that Xiaohua didn't intend to let him go, he stopped and clapped his hands. A magic tool in the shape of a gourd was taken out by him. Urging his transcendence energy, a misty blue brilliance shot out from the gourd's mouth. From top to bottom, it gradually protected his entire body. The dozen or so fireballs exploded around the blue light, but they only shook the blue light back and forth. They couldn't harm Wang Qiming at all. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Wang Qiming's face had a trace of satisfaction. Seeing that the blue light had already merged together under his feet, his heart relaxed, and he opened his mouth to speak with a smile. It was also at this moment that a jet-black brilliance appeared under his feet. With lightning speed, it pierced the place where the blue light had just converged. The blue light only resisted slightly before it was immediately pierced by the brilliance. With a pu sound, that brilliance pierced into the sole of Wang Qiming's feet. Ah! Wang Qiming was stunned, and he unconsciously lowered his head. Unfortunately, before he could understand what was going on, his entire body swayed, and he slowly disappeared from where he was standing. Hua hua! A series of sounds rang out. Sure enough, 11 number plates scattered in midair. Without waiting for Xiaohua to make a move, the dozen or so cultivators on the left were all moved. Each of them urged their flying talismans to rush towards those number plates. Xiaohua wasn't nervous. He stood in midair with his hands behind his back, and he coldly laughed. I want to see who dares to take away these number plates under my eyes. Swoosh! All the cultivators immediately came to their senses and uniformly stood in midair, not daring to take even half a step forward. Xiao! Fellow Taoist Xiao, you already have 14 number plates. You're definitely going to be a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect, a cultivator timidly said. These 11 number plates. Senior, please be merciful and give them to whoever you find pleasing to the eye. If we enter the Imperial Thunder Sect, we'll all follow fellow Taoist Zhao's lead. Humph! Xiaohua waved his hand, and those 11 number plates fell into his storage bag. He looked around and shook his head. I have no interest in your so-called cultivation family's methods. You guys should go find your own opportunities. Everyone's face revealed regret, but seeing that it was getting late, they didn't dare to stay any longer. Just as they were about to fly away, they heard Xiaohua say, Fellow Taoists called Ma Miaoming, you don't need to leave. Leave your number plate behind and return to the Thunderclap Peak by yourself. You! Ma Miaoming already had a bad feeling in his heart. Hearing Xiaohua's words, he bitterly smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao, I just want to protect myself. If I don't curry favor with Jiang Mingxiao, I also won't. Fellow Taoist Ma, there are thousands upon thousands of cultivation paths in the world. You can choose any one of them. Since you've chosen the path of relying on Jiang Mingxiao, you naturally have the awareness of your choice. In order to curry favor with Jiang Mingxiao, you dared to offend I, so you'll have to accept I's punishment. Xiaohua indifferently said, Fortunately, this is an illusion. You'll only leave your number plate behind as a lesson and won't lose your life. If you're outside the illusion array, Hee hee. This? Ma Miaoming looked at the crowd that had long since fled and sighed. He slapped his storage bag, and unexpectedly, there were 2 number plates inside. He bitterly smiled and said, I've worked hard for so long, but in the end, I've made wedding clothes for others. Forget it, forget it. As he spoke, Ma Miaoming took 2 steps forward, waved his hand, and the 2 number plates flew towards Xiaohua. Seeing Ma Miaoming take 2 steps forward, Xiaohua's eyes narrowed. He waved his hand, and the 2 number plates stopped in his hand. However, it only stopped for a moment. Then, Xiaohua waved his hand again, and the 2 number plates suddenly flew behind Xiaohua. Woo! A strange roar sounded. One of the 2 number plates suddenly turned into a long snake-like monster. It circled in the air and flew towards Xiaohua. You! Ma Miaoming, who was in front of Xiaohua, looked at Xiaohua in surprise. You! How did you know? Humph, how I know is not important. What's important is, you missed the opportunity one gave you. Xiaohua stood between Ma Miaoming and the other number plate, coldly looking at Ma Miaoming's gradually disappearing figure. That number plate was obviously Ma Miaoming's own number plate. He probably took it out to trick Xiaohua, and the monster that pounced towards Xiaohua also disappeared along with Ma Miaoming's disappearance. Opportunity? What opportunity? Ma Miaoming's figure disappeared, but he still didn't understand. -6. Chapter 1528. Cultivator aristocratic families are really unfathomable. Although Xiaohua's expression didn't change as he watched the roaring monster gradually disappear, his heart had long since turned upside down. Let's not talk about being able to use a magic tool while still in the qi refining stage. Let's not talk about being able to teach a complete cultivation technique to the main family's disciples. Just this monster, that spirit-seeking talisman, that soul-absorbing bell, and other strange methods cannot be underestimated. And that Jingwa City's Zhu clan, perhaps because they were in the limelight back then, they were able to shake the cultivator sections. That's why they suffered an unexpected calamity and were implanted with talismans. Thinking of this, Xiaohua unconsciously pinched his chin. He was thinking a little too far. In the past 2 years, Xiaohua had been practicing diligently, and at the same time, he had also taken out all the cultivation methods that he could practice and read them. He had basically finished reading the Zhu family's booklet. What was recorded in it was completely different from the cultivation methods and talismans of the current Qi country's cultivation world. It only talked about souls and talismans. It was also very different from the talismans that Xiaohua had obtained from Xiao Nan's Qing family. Although Xiaohua could somewhat understand it, he was still more confused. Of course, that book didn't talk about talismans in detail. It only said that talismans were magical powers left behind from ancient times and were recorded in a strange language. That's all. Then, it talked about the Zhu clan's failed attempts to break talismans. Of course, from this little content, Xiaohua faintly felt that these things were extremely useful. However, Xiaohua didn't have the slightest clue as to where and how to use them. Perhaps, after I learn talismans in the future, I'll be able to thoroughly understand the secrets of this booklet and find the reason. Xiaohua patted his forehead and bitterly smiled at his own thoughts. At this time, Xiaohua had already obtained 26 number plates. Adding his own, that was a total of 27 number plates, more than double his previous estimate of 12 number plates. This harvest was more than enough for the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple selection this time. Xiaohua also didn't want to attract too much attention, so he descended and sat on a large red rock, preparing to quietly wait for the arrival of dawn. However, just as Xiaohua sat down, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. Oh my, how could I forget Xue Xue? Recalling Xue Xue's rude and unreasonable appearance when she had just entered the illusion array, Xiaohua couldn't help but think of Fairy Hongxia's beautiful and understanding eyes. And in front of Kai Hongfeng, Fairy Hongxia resolutely prepared to stand up for Xiaohua, valiant and formidable. Maybe she has already joined the Huanhua sect? It's been 2 years since we last met, so she must have made a breakthrough in her cultivation. Let's just say she's in the 11th layer of qi refining. Thinking up to this point, Xiaohua's heart seemed to be filled with lofty sentiments. He couldn't sit still anymore. Clenching his fists, he stood up and laughed brightly. Damn it, I'm also in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm. From today onwards, I'm no longer a toad. Hee, a white swan. Can I eat your flesh? At this moment, Xiaohua seemed to have changed into another person. His face once again carried a trace of laziness and confidence, and there was even a hint of craftiness in his eyes. It was a far cry from the previous Xiaohua's deadpan appearance. It was also this strange temperament that caused Shue's heart to be instantly planted with feelings. This was much more lethal than any pretty boy. Concubine, dual cultivation, concubine. Xiaohua didn't know why, but he suddenly thought of the immortal beauty sect that Shue had mentioned. In his mind, Shue's figure and Fairy Hong Xia's face also appeared. Oh my, this isn't some inner demon, right? Xiaohua hurriedly gathered his thoughts and thought to himself. Shue doesn't know. She thinks that I've recovered my cultivation within 2 years. But in reality, I've cultivated from the 4th layer of qi refining all the way to the 10th layer of qi refining without any bottlenecks or sluggishness. This inner demon. I really have to be careful. And let's not talk about this for now. I'd better go find Shue. After all, I came here with her. Don't hurt her heart. Xiaohua urged his transcendence energy and used the flight technique. Just as he was about to fly into the air, 2 divine senses swept over from his left. When they saw Xiaohua, they immediately locked onto him. There really are people who aren't afraid of death. Xiaohua also used his perception to sweep the area. He immediately understood that these 2 were also 11th layer aura refining cultivators. Surrounding the 2 of them were several dozen 9th and 10th layer aura refining cultivators. Although Xiaohua's divine sense couldn't see the people clearly, it was very easy for him to see through everyone's cultivation levels. These 2 clearly came prepared. As soon as their divine senses locked onto Xiaohua, they each took out 2 different yellow talismans. They spat out a mouthful of blood essence and stuck the talismans on their bodies. A rather strange fluctuation emerged from their blood vessels and stimulated their meridians. As a result, their transcendence energy suddenly increased by more than 30% compared to before. Strange! As Xiaohua sensed, he suddenly remembered that he was still thinking about the secrets of the cultivation families. He couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. He wasn't afraid of 11th layer qi refining cultivators, but the problem was that these were 2 11th layer qi refining cultivators. Moreover, they both had secret magic tools. Look, one was shaped like an alms bowl, the other was shaped like a small pagoda. Under the urging of the 2's transcendence energy, they emitted different scattered lights and flew towards Xiaohua following their divine senses. Moreover, the dozens of 9th and 10th layer qi refining cultivators surrounding these 2 cultivators were like hungry wolves who saw a little sheep. All kinds of yellow talismans were raised in their hands and urged the flight talismans to fly over like a swarm of bees. Xiaohua wasn't willing to fight against these people. Isn't it just 20 or so number plates? This young master wants you to watch so you won't be able to eat them. Xiaohua coldly snorted. He formed a hand seal and his figure drilled into the ground. In front of 4 foundation establishment cultivators, Xiaohua could easily escape. Now, facing 11th layer qi refining cultivators, Xiaohua simply didn't have any burden. Fellow Taoist Yuan, this guy has an earth escape talisman. A delicate, baby-faced cultivator with delicate features formed a hand seal to activate the small alms bowl and shouted with some astonishment. Fellow Taoist Min, eyes incompetent, I'll go first. The other square-faced cultivator with a somewhat dull appearance activated the small pagoda. He slapped his hand and took out an earth escape talisman from his storage pouch and said, I just so happen to have a few earth escape talismans. Fellow Taoist Yuan, please wait. Fellow Taoist Min frowned and said, From what the other fellow Taoist just said, this guy has some divine abilities. Jiang Mingxiao and Wang Qiming of Guangxian were eliminated by this guy. If we didn't join forces, I'm afraid we'd have to be very careful. This? Fellow Taoist Yuan slightly hesitated. He slapped his hand and took out another Earth Escape talisman and threw it to fellow Taoist Min, saying, Fellow Taoist Min, I'll give you an Earth Escape talisman. This is Xiaohua's number plate. Ha ha, no need. Fellow Taoist Yuan waved his hand and the Earth Escape talisman flew back to fellow Taoist Min. Fellow Taoist Yuan turned his head and said, If any fellow Taoist has extra Earth Escape talismans, I'll give you the first number plate. I have one. Just as fellow Taoist Yuan finished speaking, a cultivator took out several Earth Escape talismans from his storage pouch and handed them over. This cultivator was the one who followed Jiang Mingxiao from the Changlian village. Good, fellow Taoist fan, if I gets the number plate, you two won't be able to escape. Fellow Taoist Yuan was overjoyed and reached out to catch it. He slapped his hand and pointed with his finger. The alms bow flashed and fell into fellow Taoist Yuan's hand. He looked at fellow Taoist Min and smiled. Shall we go down now? Hee hee, please. Fellow Taoist Min also put away the small pagoda. The two of them flashed and chased down from different directions. Fellow Taoist fan still had some Earth Escape talismans and loudly asked, What should we do? Fellow Taoist Yuan said, If you want to come, then come. Whoever contributed the most would get the most. There are more than 20 number plates. Fellow Taoist Min smiled brightly and had already entered the earth. However, fellow Taoist fan and the other cultivators looked at each other. None of them dared to rashly fly down. After all, there weren't many cultivators with Earth Escape talismans, not even 40% of them. They wouldn't be willing to team up and chase down a cultivator who could kill an 11th layer Qi condensation cultivator even if they had 10 times the courage. Fellow Taoist fan hesitated for a moment, then said in a low voice, We'll just wait here. If fellow Taoist Yuan and fellow Taoist Min succeed, then we'll get some benefits. If not, then we'll think of something else. Another way? Everyone's hearts trembled when they heard this. They looked around and quickly flew to a place where there was no one around. What else could they do? In order to protect themselves, they first sought the protection of an 11th layer Qi condensation cultivator. Then, with the help of the 11th layer Qi condensation cultivator's divine sense, they hunted down stray cultivators. Although they killed a lot of them, in the end, there was still a limit. They had gathered all the number plates of the 11th layer Qi condensation cultivators, but they still didn't have enough. In the end, there were no more cultivators to kill, so they could only kill each other. For example, if fellow Taoist fan hadn't revealed Xiaohua's information, his number plate would have been snatched away by someone else long ago. Everyone was on guard, yellow talismans in hand. Not only were they looking at each other, but they were also staring at the ground, ready to be summoned by the two 11th layer Qi condensation cultivators at any time. At this moment, the air was still clear, and the horizon was faintly white. This was the sign of dawn. If nothing unexpected happened, after a meal, the light of dawn would appear, and the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple selection would come to an end. Seeing the anxiety in everyone's hearts, a few of the more quick-witted ones had other ideas. But at this moment, from the ground beneath everyone's feet, a jet-black brilliance suddenly shot out. With lightning speed, it stabbed into fellow Taoist fan's feet. Fellow Taoist fan didn't even have time to react. The Iron Cloak talisman and other defensive yellow talismans on his body were pierced. As the faint brilliance flickered, fellow Taoist fan only had time to put on a look of astonishment. His entire body began to sway and gradually disappeared. Bang! At the same time fellow Taoist fan disappeared, a number plate appeared in midair. Haha! The fat cultivator closest to fellow Taoist fan already had some yellow talismans in his hand. When he saw the number plate appear, he grinned and threw the yellow talismans in his hand, forcing the surrounding cultivators to retreat. He flew a few steps forward and reached out to grab the number plate. But just as his hand touched the number plate, a cold voice sounded in his ear. You dare to take this young master's things? 6. You're tuning into the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.